The success dopamine trap. Imagine hitting a major goal, finishing a project, landing a promotion, achieving something you once thought was impossible. For a brief moment, you feel it: pride, excitement, maybe even happiness. But then, something strange happens. That feeling fades. Fast. The celebration ends quickly, replaced by a gnawing whisper: what's next? This is the success dopamine trap, where your brain rewards you with a hit of pleasure for achieving something, then resets the target almost immediately. You chase success for the high, but the high doesn't last. It was never meant to. Dopamine is designed to reward pursuit, not possession. It spikes when you move toward a goal, when you're anticipating a reward, not when you've already claimed it. So the thrill isn't in having, it's in chasing. You begin to live in the future, in what hasn't been done yet, in the next goal, the next metric, the next hill to climb. Progress becomes your drug. Restlessness becomes your norm. You're not addicted to achievement itself, but to the neurochemical rush it brings. And slowly, success starts to feel hollow. You reach milestones and feel nothing, or worse, disappointment, because your brain already moved the finish line. The applause fades, the inbox fills, and you're back to running. Let's talk about Theo. He's built 3 businesses, has a loyal team, a beautiful home, and a family who loves him. From the outside, he's a success story. But internally, he's empty. Because every time he achieves something, he gives himself 5 minutes of validation, then erases the joy with a new, bigger goal. It's never enough, not because the goals weren't meaningful, but because he never stopped long enough to feel them. This trap is subtle. Society glorifies it. Stay hungry. Never settle. Always be growing. And so we confuse ambition with aliveness. But real fulfillment doesn't come from constant motion. It comes from learning how to feel the moment you're in, before racing to the next one. The success dopamine trap hijacks your self-worth. You begin to believe that being still is lazy, that celebrating is indulgent, that slowing down will cost you everything. But the truth is, constant chasing burns out your soul. You forget who you are outside of goals. You become a machine for movement, not a human being with depth. The brain adapts quickly. What thrilled you a year ago barely registers now. That's hedonic adaptation, your brain's way of normalizing what once seemed extraordinary. Without reflection and intention, you'll keep escalating your goals without ever increasing your joy. You begin to chase not just progress, but the feeling of progress. You stack goals like a ladder with no top, convincing yourself that one more step will finally make you feel whole. But the trap is that your brain doesn't care how meaningful the goal is. It rewards novelty, urgency, momentum. So even deeply fulfilling accomplishments get flattened by this chemical hunger. Think of someone running a race, not for the medal, but because they fear what might surface if they stop. The silence, the questions, the self they've never had time to meet. That's what this trap really protects you from. Not failure, but introspection. You may find yourself uncomfortable during slow seasons, moments when life asks you to rest. Instead of gratitude, you feel anxiety. Instead of calm, you feel guilt. Because you've fused activity with identity, and without forward motion, you fear you might disappear. Theo once said, "I'm scared that if I stop chasing goals, people will forget me." That's the deeper wound, the belief that love is conditional on achievement, that rest equals irrelevance, that slowing down makes you replaceable. So you push harder, you move faster, you hit every deadline, surpass every metric, and feel emptier with each win. It's not burnout from overwork. It's burnout from emotional starvation. Because you're feeding your ambition, but starving your soul. And the world praises you for it. They see your milestones, your stats, your titles, and call it greatness. They don't see the nights you lie awake, wondering why nothing feels enough. They don't hear the voice in your head that says, if you stop, you'll fall behind. You'll lose everything. But what if falling behind isn't real? What if it's just a myth built by a world obsessed with speed? What if enough isn't somewhere out there, but a muscle you learn to build in here? Try this. After your next success, don't plan, don't pivot, don't strategize, just feel. Let it settle in your bones. Let the pride sink into your cells. Let it rewire your brain, not to chase harder, but to cherish deeper. Success should not be a finish line you run past. It should be a seat you get to rest in. Reclaim the stillness between achievements. Relearn joy not as a goal, but as a state. Reconnect with the person behind the progress, the one who existed before the wins and will still exist without them. Because you are not the number of tasks you've completed. You are not the size of your following, the weight of your resume, or the pace of your hustle. You are a human being designed to feel, to pause, to be. Let that be your new definition of success. Let it be enough. Let yourself be enough. Right now, right here. The thought ownership mirage. You think every thought you hear belongs to you because it arrived in your mind, because it used your voice, because it echoed inside the cathedral of your skull, and that made it feel personal, intimate, true. But what if it wasn't? What if not every thought that crosses your consciousness is yours? This is the thought ownership mirage, a silent illusion that convinces you that anything you think, every fear, every doubt, every cruel whisper must have come from you, because where else could it have come from? But here's the truth. Your brain is not a sealed chamber. It's a receiver, a translator, a radio tower, constantly picking up signals from everywhere: culture, trauma, childhood, media, memory, and the moods of people near you. Thoughts don't always originate inside you. They arrive. And then they wear your voice like a mask. Imagine you're walking down the street and a thought flashes. I'm worthless. Your body reacts. Your stomach tightens. Your chest sinks. You assume it's your truth. But what if it was just a signal, something you picked up from years of subtle messaging, or a passing feeling from someone else, or the echo of a parent's disapproval long ago? It sounded like you, but it wasn't you. The thought ownership mirage is the moment you confuse reception with origin. You believe something because you heard it internally, but that doesn't mean it came from your core. We are conditioned to treat thoughts as evidence, but many thoughts are noise, static, interference. Your brain generates over 6,000 thoughts a day. Not all of them are true, not all of them are helpful, and almost none of them define who you are. But if you're not aware of the mirage, you accept them blindly. You think, I'll never be enough, and instead of questioning it, you fold around it like it's gospel. You think, everyone's judging me, and instead of checking reality, you shrink your life. You think, I should be doing more, and instead of asking where that standard came from, you overextend yourself again. This illusion is especially strong in people who were conditioned to doubt themselves. If you grew up being criticized, emotionally neglected, or subtly manipulated, your mental filter might be weakened. And now, thoughts that don't serve you slip through as if they're native to you. But they're not. They're imports, parasites, echoes. And you are not your echoes. You are the one hearing them. This is the key. You are not the thought. You are the awareness that notices the thought. And once you realize that, you gain power. You gain the ability to pause and ask, where did this come from? Is it mine? Does it serve me? Or is this just noise I accidentally tuned into? Look at Jess. She's successful on paper, but here's a constant loop in her head. You're a fraud. For years, she thought that voice was her truth. But in therapy, she traced it back to a teacher who told her, you're not as smart as you think. That voice sounded like her, but it wasn't hers. It was an old signal, replaying like a scratched record. Or take Liam. He feels panic every time he rests. A thought rushes in. You're lazy. You're wasting time. But that thought came from a parent who only showed affection when he was productive. Now, even in adulthood, the signal repeats. But it's not his voice. It's borrowed guilt. So what do you do when a thought shows up? You don't just accept it. You become curious. Treat it like a knock on the door. Who are you? Where did you come from? What do you want me to believe? And why? And more importantly, what would I feel if I didn't believe this thought? This question reveals everything, because often you'll realize that the thought was keeping you trapped, small, quiet, anxious, obedient. And when you stop treating it like truth, it dissolves. You don't have to fight every thought. You don't have to analyze them to death. You just have to stop mistaking them for identity, because your thoughts are not you. They're suggestions. Some are wise, some are wounds, some are weeds, and some are just passing ghosts with nowhere else to haunt. You are not broken because you think dark things. You are not weak because your mind wanders into fear. You are human. Your strength is not in controlling every thought. It's in learning which ones to trust and which ones to release. So next time a painful thought appears, pause, breathe, whisper back, "Not everything I hear belongs to me," and keep walking. The familiarity loop trick. Repetition is powerful, not because it proves something, but because it makes something feel real. That's the familiarity loop trick. Your brain doesn't just crave truth, it craves efficiency. When a message repeats often enough, your brain starts recognizing it as familiar, and familiarity feels safe. Familiarity feels true, even if it isn't. That's how illusions are born. You hear something enough times about yourself, about the world, about others, and it becomes internalized, not through evidence, but exposure. Not because it's right, but because it's repeated. It's why propaganda works. It's why self-doubt becomes a habit. It's why people stay in toxic cycles. The story has been told so many times that it settles in like fact, even if it's fiction. Your inner critic? It's often just a familiar voice on loop. I'm not good enough. They'll leave anyway. I always mess things up. Those thoughts aren't true, but they're old, and what's old feels safe, even when it hurts. That's the trick. Your brain isn't designed to chase truth, it's designed to chase certainty, and repetition breeds certainty. It started early. Maybe someone repeated your flaws until you believed them. Maybe society echoed messages that told you who you could or couldn't be. Maybe trauma whispered the same fear over and over until even joy felt suspicious. And now, when a new truth tries to enter, something kind, something hopeful, it feels foreign, uncomfortable, maybe even wrong, because comfort isn't peace. It's just what's practiced. The familiarity loop creates a shortcut in your brain, a well-worn path, and the more you walk it, the harder it becomes to see any other way. But here's the breakthrough. If repetition built the loop, repetition can also break it. New truths must be chosen, not just once, but over and over. You must speak them aloud, even when they sound fake, even when your chest tightens and your mind screams, "Liar." Because healing doesn't start when the old voice disappears. It starts when the new voice is practiced enough to feel real. You say, "I am enough. I can be loved without pain. I don't have to earn my worth." And at first, it feels hollow. But over time, over repetition, it carves a new groove in the mind, a new loop, and suddenly, truth and comfort begin to align. Not because the lie is gone, but because the truth is louder. The familiarity loop. Trick wants you stuck in the past, but you can write a new future, one repetition at a time. It's the same reason a lie repeated enough times becomes a legend. Why certain songs, even sad ones, feel like home. Why you gravitate to people who treat you like the ones who hurt you. Because the emotional pattern, though damaging, is known. And the known is easier than the unknown. Even in pain, the familiar offers control. This is how emotional addiction works. You become hooked not on the pleasure of a belief, but its predictability. The brain isn't moral, it's mechanical. And that mechanism is hungry for shortcuts. So it files repetition as trust, routine as truth, pattern as proof. And this is where you start confusing belief with identity. You say, "I'm just like this." But you're not. You're just looped into stories someone else began, looped into labels that no longer serve you. looped into habits that run your life from the shadows. It's not your fault. It's the trick. But the solution isn't revolution. It's iteration. You whisper a new story every day. You show up to a new sentence. You challenge the inner loop. You take the hand of discomfort and walk with it until it becomes your new familiar. That's how healing works, quietly, daily, through repetition, not of wounds but of worth. And one day, the voice inside that once doubted everything says, I believe this, not because it's louder, but because it's been loved into truth. So, be mindful of what you repeat, even in thought, even in silence, because your mind is always listening. It doesn't know irony. It doesn't detect sarcasm. It just absorbs. The jokes you make about your worth, the doubts you replay in your head, they're etching grooves in your perception. Repetition isn't just influence, it's architecture. You're building your identity with every thought you let echo. So build intentionally. Practice speaking the version of you that hasn't had a voice yet. Let your truth become a ritual. Let kindness become a reflex. Let worthiness become familiar. And every time the old loop returns, meet it with a new sentence. Say it out loud, again and again and again, until the lie forgets how to speak, until truth no longer knocks. It lives here now, inside you. Not because it was easy, but because you chose it, over and over, until it became real. Because repetition is how the soul learns to believe again. And this time, it's learning something beautiful, not borrowed, not echoed, not forced, but earned, through every soft, defiant repetition that said, I am more than what I was told. And now, I finally believe it. Identity costume effect. At some point, maybe as a child or teenager, you discovered something simple but powerful. Being liked feels safer than being real. Praise became a drug. Approval, a compass. And so, you adjusted. A teacher smiled when you were quiet, so you became the quiet one. Friends laughed when you acted tough, so you became the funny one. Your family only listened when you fixed things, so you became the responsible one. None of it was fake, but over time, none of it was fully you either. This is the identity costume effect, the slow transformation of the self into a collection of socially rewarded roles, performed so often, so precisely, that you start to believe they're all you are. And the real you, the soft core, the strange thoughts, the unfiltered truth, it fades, buried under performance. The problem isn't the performance, it's forgetting it was ever a costume. You don't even notice it at first. You're just trying to survive, to be useful, to be loved, to avoid being alone. And little by little, your inner world bends to the feedback of those around you. You say what people expect. You smile when you're supposed to. You hold it together when you're breaking inside, and you get rewarded for it. That's the trap. Society claps louder for roles than it does for reality. Be consistent, be stable, be digestible, but most of all, be familiar. So you shrink, or shapeshift, or rehearse yourself into a version that gets applause. And then one day, you realize you don't know who you are without the audience. You catch yourself laughing at a joke you don't find funny, nodding in agreement to avoid conflict, apologizing for taking up space. You feel disconnected, not because something's wrong, but because everything feels performed. There's a grief that hits when you realize your identity may have been molded by survival, not choice. And when you try to peel off the costume, it hurts, because there's no applause for becoming yourself. There's no guarantee of love for being honest. Vulnerability is quiet. Realness is risky. And breaking out of a role can feel like breaking a contract with your job, your family, your partner, your entire world. But here's the truth. You are not the performance. You never were. The part of you that adapts is brilliant. It kept you safe. It got you through rooms that were too cold to be real in. But now, you're older, and your soul wants space. Your truth wants a voice. and the mask that once saved you is now suffocating you. So what do? You begin gently. You notice the places you shrink, the laughs that aren't yours, the opinions you swallowed just to keep the peace. And you ask, who am I when I'm not performing? And yes, it will feel terrifying, because the roles you play are often tied to love. If I'm not the smart one, will they still respect me? If I stop being strong, will they still need me? If I show the mess, will they still stay? But here's the beautiful, brutal gift of peeling back the performance. You find out who truly sees you. The ones who only love the role will drift. Let them. The ones who love you will remain, and they'll love you deeper, not because you're useful, but because you're you. Reclaiming your identity isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of remembrance. You remember the kid who dreamed weird dreams, the teenager who asked strange questions, the adult who still craves softness but learned to pretend that wasn't necessary. You remember the person behind the applause. This isn't easy work. It's slow, awkward, sometimes lonely. But every moment you show up as yourself, the costume loosens, the performance thins, and the real you steps forward, not polished, not perfect, but whole. Imagine a child who dances wildly in their room, paints with their fingers, sings off-key, but with joy. There's no mask yet, no role, just being. But the moment that child steps into a room that frowns at too much energy, too much emotion, too much difference, they begin to edit themselves. They shrink their joy to avoid punishment. They hide their curiosity to avoid ridicule. They perform maturity to earn love. And so begins the first stitch in the costume. This doesn't stop at childhood. In fact, adulthood often rewards costume wearing even more. You become the overachiever because achievement gave you identity. You become the helper because being needed made you feel worthy. You become the stable one because any crack was punished with withdrawal. You don't choose the costume. The world offers it, and you accept because it feels like safety. But after years of performing, you forget it was ever a choice. And then, sometimes in a quiet moment, perhaps after a heartbreak, a job loss, or simply a strange silence, you feel it. The disconnection, the emptiness. You realize the applause stopped, but you're still on stage, smiling, nodding, holding poses that no longer feel like home. Reclaiming yourself after years of performance isn't about rebellion. It's about reunion with the self who never needed to be anything but real. And when you begin this return, strange things happen. Your laugh changes. Your preferences shift. You say no more. You rest without guilt. You speak without scripts. And those around you, especially those who benefited from the old performance, might panic, or push back, or disappear. Let them. Because the only people worth keeping are the ones who don't need you to shrink. The costume might have earned you a place in their story, but your truth will find you a place in your own. And that, finally, is where you belong. The silent thought. Filter. Most of your thoughts never reach you, not because you didn't think them, but because your brain filtered them out before they could surface. What you experience as your conscious mind is only the tip of something much larger, a carefully curated trickle of cognition, spoon-fed to you by systems designed for safety, not truth. This is the silent thought filter. You imagine yourself thinking freely as if every idea you have is yours. But the reality is that your brain is running millions of simulations per second. It's filtering, suppressing, rejecting, and choosing only a fraction of those simulations to offer to your conscious self. And those choices? They're not always made in your favor, because your brain's first priority isn't freedom, it's survival. It's not asking, what's the most honest thought? It's asking, what will keep you safe? What will preserve your identity? What won't disrupt the fragile balance you've built? So, a thought arrives, raw, uncomfortable, subversive. It questions your beliefs. It threatens your narrative. It exposes a contradiction. Before it can even form into words, it's gone, dismissed, erased. And what you're left with is a sanitized version, smoothed out and digestible. Not the truth, but the portion you're able to accept without breaking. This happens constantly. When you meet someone new, your mind generates dozens of impressions, most of which you'll never feel, because many don't align with your assumptions or social conditioning. When you remember your past, your brain filters not just the memories, but the meanings of those memories. It silences inconvenient interpretations. It favors coherence over accuracy. And when you try to imagine the future, you don't see the raw uncertainty. You see what your brain thinks you can handle. The silent thought. Filter wraps your reality in bubble wrap, not to deceive you, but to protect your illusion of control. In neuroscience, this is tied to the default mode network, the brain's internal narrator that maintains a stable sense of self. It edits your thoughts for continuity, for safety, for social acceptance. Thoughts that threaten your constructed identity are discarded before you even know they existed. That means the person you think you are is not built on all your thoughts, just the filtered ones, just the thoughts that passed the test, the ones that didn't rattle the cage. It's like running a news station that only airs stories that won't start a riot. And every once in a while, something raw slips through, a strange idea, an impulse, a question you weren't supposed to ask. You feel it like static, like déjà vu, but it's gone just as fast, buried under more acceptable noise. And this isn't just a glitch, it's how your brain was designed, to keep the peace inside, to avoid cognitive dissonance, to prevent mental chaos. But there's a cost. You start confusing comfort with truth. You start believing that what you think is all there is. You stop noticing the gaps between what you feel and what you know. And over time, your real thoughts, the ones that hurt or stretch you or challenge everything, fade into silence. You wonder why you're stuck in the same patterns, why you keep making the same choices, why certain questions never get answered. It's not because those questions aren't in you, it's because they were filtered out before they reached your awareness. People with trauma often experience a harsher version of this filter. The brain blocks out ideas that even hint at past pain. Entire emotional landscapes are left unvisited, not because they're gone, but because they were locked behind doors labeled too dangerous. And those with anxiety? They experience a different distortion. Their filter malfunctions, letting in too many catastrophic thoughts while still blocking clarity and calm. The filter is always active, just not always fair. So how do you fight something invisible? How do you become aware of thoughts that never made it into awareness? You start by noticing the silence, the pause, the reflexive rejections, the feelings of discomfort that arrive without words, because they used to be thoughts, but your brain decided not to translate them. You notice the things you never let yourself think, about the people you love, about your past, about what you really want, and you ask, who told me not to think this? Was it me, or the version of me built to survive? Because under that filter, you're still in there, the full you, the one with dangerous clarity, with unapproved opinions, with forgotten dreams, with instincts you were told to mute. And maybe you can't remove the filter entirely, but you can learn to lean in, to listen to the silence, to catch the edge of a thought before it fades, to reclaim pieces of yourself, one suppressed idea at a time. Because if most of your thoughts die before reaching you, then who you think you are is only a shadow of what you could be. The real you, the uncensored you, that's still waiting underneath, not gone, just unheard. Emotion contagion. Spillover. Imagine walking into a room and instantly feeling off. No one says anything cruel. No one even looks at you wrong, but something in the air shifts. You feel heavy, maybe anxious, maybe sad. But here's the thing, you were fine a moment ago. That shift, that's not your feeling, it's someone else's. Welcome to the phenomenon of emotion contagion spillover. Your brain is wired to mirror. Mirror neurons, tiny biological mimics, allow us to feel what others feel. They fire when you observe someone else's emotion, even if they don't speak. A raised eyebrow, a sigh, a sudden silence. Without realizing it, your nervous system syncs to theirs. You absorb moods through tone, posture, micro expressions. Even a paused breath can echo into your gut. You think you're sensitive, but it's more than that. You're porous. The boundaries between your emotions and theirs blur. You don't just empathize, you internalize. You carry emotions that didn't start in you, and you don't know how to put them down. Over time, this can reshape your identity. You might assume you're moody, anxious, unpredictable, but those might not be your feelings at all. You might just be a sponge in a storm of emotional signals, collecting every drop and thinking it's rain. You walk into a meeting and feel tension, but it's not yours. You visit family and feel guilt, but you didn't do anything wrong. A friend vents sadness, and now you're crying alone hours later, wondering what's wrong with you. Nothing is. You just never learned how to filter what enters your emotional space. This isn't a flaw, it's a survival tool. Our ancestors needed to attune to others to stay safe. Feeling the tribe's fear kept you alive. But in today's overstimulated world, that gift can turn against you. So how do you manage it? Start by naming it. This isn't mine. When a wave of emotion hits, pause. Ask, was I feeling this 5 minutes ago? If not, trace the scene. Did someone nearby shift their energy? Did a voice crack, a posture slump? Awareness is your first boundary. Then ground yourself. Breathe deeply. Focus on physical sensations. Anchor in your body. Emotions from others often live in the air, in your chest, shoulders, throat. Drop back into your legs, your spine, your breath. Reclaim the space of you. Create rituals of release. A walk, a shower, music, even speaking the words, I release what isn't mine. It sounds simple, but it trains your brain to distinguish the self from the spillover. And most importantly, don't shame your sensitivity. It's not weakness. It's perception turned up to survival mode. Learn to tune it, not mute it. Because being able to feel deeply is not the problem. Forgetting what belongs to you, that's the trap. You're allowed to be empathetic and protected. You're allowed to feel and still have boundaries. And you are allowed to give yourself back to yourself. Let's look at Mia. She's a compassionate friend, always tuned in, always ready to support. But lately, she feels like she's carrying the weight of 10 lives. When her coworker vents about work stress, she absorbs it. When her partner's in a bad mood, it follows her into sleep. When someone she passes on the street looks anxious, her chest tightens before she even realizes what happened. Mia isn't dramatic or overly sensitive. She's experiencing emotional bleed-through, and she doesn't know where she ends. If you've felt this, you know it doesn't take words to feel contaminated. Sometimes just someone's tone, the shift in their jawline, or even their silence says everything. You feel the signal, like heat from a burner you didn't touch, and you take it as your own pain. This is emotion contagion at its most invisible. There's no shouting, no trauma dump, just subtle transference. It can even happen through texts, emails, or social media. A sad post, a harsh comment, a video of someone suffering. It enters your nervous system like smoke through a crack, and you carry it. You might become the fixer, the soother, the emotional regulator for everyone around you. Not because they asked, but because you can't rest until the tension settles. You start reading rooms the way others read books, scanning for shifts, sensing emotional weather. But here's the price. When you're always tracking others' moods, you lose touch with your own. And then the identity crisis begins. You don't know what you're feeling because it's all mixed. You think you're sad, but it's someone else's heartbreak. You think you're angry, but it's not your boundary that was crossed. It's theirs. Over time, your inner compass spins wildly. You become anxious not just from others' pain, but from the fear that you'll lose yourself trying to hold it all. So you overfunction. You smile more. You agree more. You soothe more. But internally, your emotional bandwidth is shrinking. Your compassion, once your strength, becomes your source of fatigue. This is emotional burnout, not from too much feeling, but from too much feeling that never belonged to you. It's not just mirror neurons, it's emotional entrainment, your brain and body syncing to the rhythms of people around you. Think of it like tuning forks placed side by side. One starts to vibrate, and the other, without ever touching, begins to hum at the same frequency. You're humming with frequencies that were never yours. That's why grounding matters, not as a buzzword, but as survival. When you feel others' emotions coming in, ground like a tree, not to ignore, but to channel. Let the storm pass through your leaves, but let your roots hold you steady. Develop rituals not to protect yourself from people, but to protect your energy inside people's presence. Build emotional boundaries not with walls, but with windows. Let the light in, but close them when the storm howls too loud. Practice choosing when to open. And remember, you don't owe your nervous system to every flicker of someone else's pain. Here's a truth. You are not selfish for asking, "Is this mine?" You are not cold for letting someone hold their own emotion. You are not broken for needing space. You are emotionally intelligent and relearning how to live without drowning in what you've been trained to absorb. Your feelings matter, and so does your ability to tell what's real for you. You don't need to carry every sorrow to prove you care. Sometimes the most loving act is not to absorb, but to anchor, not to drown with them, but to be the shore they swim toward. Feel deeply, but stay rooted. Care fully, but stay whole. That's not detachment, that's clarity, and it's how you survive the spillover. The imagination. Overwrite loop. Your memory lies to you, not out of malice, but because imagination is stronger than you think. You remember a moment, a childhood trip, a conversation, a loss, and you're certain it happened exactly that way. But what if it didn't? What if your mind rewrote it piece by piece every time you remembered it? This is the imagination overwrite loop, where what you dreamed becomes what you believe, and what actually happened slips quietly out the back door of your memory, never to return. It starts with a single moment. You imagine how something could have gone, what you should have said, how they should have looked, how it should have felt. You replay it, again and again. You add color, emotion, dialogue. It becomes more vivid than the real thing ever was. And then, your brain stores that version, not as fiction, but as fact. Because the brain doesn't tag memories as real or imagined. It tags them as emotionally charged. And emotion is the ink that writes memory deep into the brain. So when your imagined memory feels more emotional than the real one, your mind keeps the dream and drops the truth. And now, you live with a past that never happened. But to you, it's real. Imagine Lucas. He remembers being humiliated during a middle school presentation. He can describe the moment in detail, the laughter, the embarrassment, the way his throat closed. But his teacher later tells him there was no laughter, no teasing, just silence. Still, Lucas feels the shame because for years he imagined the worst, and now that imagined humiliation is stored like fact. Or take Amira. She remembers her first kiss as magical. Sunset light, wind in her hair, a song playing softly in the distance. But her journal from that week tells a different story. It was awkward, rushed, clumsy, but Amira needed it to be beautiful. So her imagination stepped in, edited the reel, and now she swears it was perfect. This isn't delusion, it's human. Your brain is a storyteller. And when the raw footage is too dull, too painful, or too fragmented, it fills the gaps. And the more often you revisit a memory, the more it changes. Not because of time, but because every recall is a reconstruction. Your brain pulls the file from storage, edits it with your current emotions, and then saves it again, overwriting the original. And if you're someone with a vivid imagination, this process happens faster, stronger, more convincingly. You begin to believe you were always the outsider, that someone meant to hurt you when they didn't, that a relationship was perfect when it was actually falling apart. You remember arguments that never happened, kindnesses that were never spoken, wounds that were deeper or shallower than they truly were. And slowly, the line between memory and imagination blurs. You start making decisions based on events that didn't occur. You hold grudges against shadows. You mourn versions of people that only lived in your mind. This is the imagination overwrite loop, a distortion that feels like truth because it feels true, and feeling, not fact, is what memory prioritizes. But here's the question: how do you escape it? You start by doubting certainty. You ask, how do I know this happened like I think it did? What might I be leaving out? What emotional need could be shaping my memory? Because often, it's not about the facts. It's about the feeling we needed: closure, meaning, justice, romance, redemption. When life didn't give it to us, imagination did. And there's nothing wrong with that, unless you let it become the compass for your identity. Memory is not a mirror, it's a canvas. And sometimes the paintbrush isn't memory, it's longing. So be gentle with your past. Don't carve your self-worth from imagined wounds. Don't chase ghosts of moments that only lived in dreams. Don't blame yourself for not remembering things clearly. No one does. Even the most confident memory is stitched together with assumptions, feelings, and fragments. But do stay curious. Hold your memories like stories, true in feeling, maybe not in detail. Ask, what is this memory trying to protect? What is it trying to prove? And what happens if I let it be imperfect? You are not your imagined past. You are the one watching it shift, the one aware of the edit, the one who can choose, finally, to stop the loop. Because sometimes the most healing thing you can say is, maybe it didn't happen exactly like that, and that's okay. That's boxed perception syndrome. Perception isn't passive, it's filtered. That's the root of boxed perception syndrome. Your brain doesn't show you the world as it is. It shows you the version that fits what you already believe. The rest, it deletes. Not maliciously, just efficiently. We are built to ignore what contradicts our internal map. You don't see with your eyes, you see with your mind. The eyes capture, but the brain interprets. And interpretation is never neutral. If you expect to be unloved, you miss the signs of care. If you believe you're incapable, you discount your successes. If you think people are threats, your attention magnifies slights and filters out kindness. This isn't metaphor, it's neurological. The reticular activating system in your brain scans every second for what matters, but what you've trained it to believe matters is dictated by your worldview. It's why two people can walk through the same day and remember different realities. The problem begins when your beliefs were shaped in pain. When trauma boxed in your expectations so tightly that everything outside it looks false, even when it's real. You've boxed your perception to survive. But now that box is shrinking your life. You don't try new things, not because you're lazy, but because your mind predicts failure before you start. You miss opportunities because your brain skips over them as if they're irrelevant data. You stay in unhealthy patterns because anything unfamiliar registers as unsafe, even joy. And this isn't your fault, it's programming. Early in life, you formed patterns of belief to make sense of chaos. If love hurt, you learned to fear affection. If expression caused punishment, you learned to go silent. These became your truths. And now, anything outside those truths gets deleted by your mind's auto-editing software. But the most dangerous part? You don't even know it's happening. You think you're seeing clearly, but your brain is trimming reality to fit your wounds. And it's so seamless, so automatic, that you never notice the missing pieces. That's why growth feels like confusion, because healing breaks the pattern. It brings in data that doesn't fit the box, compliments that feel fake, opportunities that feel dangerous, peace that feels suspicious. And your mind tries to reject them, not because they're wrong, but because they don't fit. This is where you have to fight your own filter. You have to pause and ask, is what I'm perceiving based on reality or on expectation? Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is notice what you almost didn't notice. The smile someone gave you when you felt invisible. The small win you dismissed because it didn't feel grand. The chance you walked past because your story said you weren't ready. These moments live at the edges of your box, fragments of truth trying to break through the cracks. But to let them in, you must question the box itself. Ask, who built it? Whose voice decided what I was allowed to expect? What parts of me did I shrink to stay inside it? Because perception is not fixed, it's shaped. And what has been shaped can be reshaped. You don't need to force your way out. You just need to expand the frame, widen the lens, train your brain to tolerate new data, to welcome contradiction, to sit in the unfamiliar without fear. Start with tiny rebellions. Let kindness in, even if it feels fake. Celebrate success, even if doubt echoes behind it. Believe someone when they say they care. Even if your old wiring screams otherwise, you're not lying to yourself. You're rewiring yourself. You're teaching your brain that truth can live outside the box. And it's been waiting for you, because one day, the box that once protected you starts to suffocate you. It stops filtering danger and starts filtering life. And the version of you that was meant to thrive never even gets seen, not by others and not by you. So break it. Not with force, but with vision. See beyond the edit. Pause before assumption. Catch yourself in the act of deletion and choose to notice anyway. Because beyond the box is a world you were never supposed to survive without. It's the one you were born to live in. You don't have to tear down the entire box overnight. Just poke holes in it. Let a little light in. Let some doubt creep into the certainty of your old beliefs. Let a new possibility whisper against the walls of what you once thought was final. And as those holes multiply, something wild begins to happen. The box becomes transparent, then fragile, then optional, and eventually, it dissolves. You begin to see reality not as what you expect, but as what it truly is. Vast, messy, kind, chaotic, beautiful. You make room for paradox, for complexity, for a version of you that is soft, strong, scared, brave, all at once. And now, you're not boxed. You're blooming. Because boxed perception syndrome wasn't your curse, it was your starting point. And this vision, this awareness, this terrifying freedom is your birthright. You are allowed to see more than your past allowed you to. You are allowed to revise the story, to update the map, to reclaim the world your brain once made too small to hold the real you. This isn't just perception, it's liberation, and it begins the moment you say, I'm ready to see what I've never seen before, even if it changes everything. The time. Misplacement glitch. Imagine walking through your day, making choices, reacting to people, navigating life, believing you're fully present. But what if you're not? What if, no matter how now it feels, you're always a few steps behind time itself? This is the time misplacement glitch, a scientific and emotional truth that unsettles the foundation of what we think is real. Neuroscience shows us that your brain delays what you perceive. You are not experiencing the world as it happens. You are experiencing a curated playback, a lag, a simulation of the moment, not the moment itself. Every sight you see, every sound you hear, every touch you feel, it already occurred. Your brain needs a few milliseconds to process light, to translate vibration, to calculate meaning. So what you think is now is already gone. You live in a past that feels present. This isn't just a scientific quirk. It's a psychological echo with deep implications. Consider trauma. When something hurtful happens, your nervous system stamps it with urgency. It locks the pain into your response mechanisms. And from then on, your reactions to anything similar aren't responses to what's happening. They're echoes of what already happened. You are reacting to the past, layered onto the present, projected into the future. This is why someone can say something harmless and your chest tightens, why a scent can flood you with dread, why an expression can ruin your day. You're not paranoid. You're misaligned in time. You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to everything they remind your body of. The glitch doesn't just affect pain, it affects joy, love, grief, ambition. You fall in love, not with who someone is right now, but with a constructed image based on your past longings. You mourn not only what is gone, but what your brain still believes should be here. You strive toward goals, but your definition of success was often formed years ago through someone else's dream. Your memory, your identity, your now, they're all products of delay. Even when you think you're making a choice in real time, your subconscious has already decided. Studies show that decisions register in your brain up to 7 seconds before you're consciously aware of making them. You're a witness to the decision, not the originator. So what does that mean? It means the now is an illusion, a beautifully orchestrated illusion built from lagging signals, chemical reactions, emotional baggage, and sensory delay. You are always reacting, never fully initiating. A fraction of a second too late to ever be in sync with time itself. But here's where it gets even more eerie. Your consciousness tries to hide this from you. Your brain edits out the gaps, fills in the blanks, masks the lag with fluidity. Like a film running 24 frames per second, it stitches together a seamless illusion of flow. You feel present because your brain wants you to feel present. The truth would be too destabilizing. But if you're brave enough to look closer, you begin to see the cracks. Moments where time stutters, where a thought appears before the stimulus, where a flash of déjà vu reminds you you've already lived this. Moments when you act on instinct and only later understand why. Moments when memory alters itself, subtly rewritten. So your timeline feels smoother. And in those cracks, you glimpse the truth. You are never fully here. So what do we do with this? Do we panic? Do we despair? Or do we begin to honor how fragile and surreal this whole experience really is? Maybe the goal isn't to be perfectly present. Maybe it's to make peace with lag. To understand that our lives are tapes played half a second behind, and that's okay. Maybe wisdom is learning to slow down, not because you can catch time, but because you can learn to feel its shape, even as it slips ahead. Maybe presence isn't about being in the now. Maybe it's about being kind to yourself for never truly being able to. This glitch doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. A living being stitched together by delays and dreams. A self that lives in playback and still finds ways to love, to hope, to heal. The moment is already gone, but your experience of it, your memory of it, your interpretation of it, that's yours, and in that echo, meaning lives. Not in perfect timing, but in the space between the real and the remembered. That space is where you are. Now imagine the effects this glitch has on relationships. When you argue with someone, you're not just reacting to what they just said, you're also reacting to the version of them from your memory. The version that hurt you once. The version you projected hope onto. Your nervous system processes their presence through a filter of latency and history. And they're doing the same to you. No wonder we miscommunicate. No wonder we say, "You never listen," or "You always do this," when in fact, they're saying something new. But your brain hears the echo of 10 old wounds. You're fighting ghosts in real time, loving shadows of former selves, forgiving versions that no longer exist. And it shows up in how we carry the past forward. People don't just remember pain, they relive it. They replay that betrayal in their head until it fuses with the present. They prepare for abandonment even when no one's leaving. They rehearse apologies for wounds never healed. And they don't know why they're so tired, because they're living out of sync. They're stuck between what already ended and what hasn't quite begun. That's the secret weight of time. It's not measured in seconds. It's measured in emotional echoes, in silent expectations, in nervous systems bracing for what was, as if it's still coming. And still, we function. We fall in love. We chase joy. We try. You could call it tragic, or you could call it beautiful, because to be human is to navigate an imperfect signal and still find meaning, still choose growth, Still search for peace inside the noise. Maybe you'll never catch the real now, but maybe the courage lies in choosing presence anyway, even if it's a half second behind. To forgive without the apology. To feel without the proof. To slow down when the world wants speed. You will always be reacting to something that's already gone, but you can still respond with intention, with clarity, with compassion. And in that choice, even in the delay, you become something time can't erase, conscious. You may live in the echo, but the echo still matters, because sometimes it's the only place truth can be heard. The certainty illusion trap. You feel most certain when you should be doubting. That's the trap, the illusion, the lie your brain tells you in the name of efficiency. The more confident you feel, the more likely it is that your mind has stopped asking questions, stopped checking for error, stopped wondering if it might be wrong. This is the certainty illusion trap. Your brain wasn't built to seek truth, it was built to survive. And for survival, doubt is dangerous. Uncertainty is exhausting. So the mind does something remarkable. It creates the illusion of certainty not as a reward for being right, but as a shortcut, a safety signal, a way to stop thinking, a feeling, not a fact. You've felt it. That warm rush of, I know I'm right, the clarity that seems to settle like a fog lifting. The surge of confidence that makes you speak louder, push harder, argue longer. But what if that's not insight at all? What if it's the moment your critical thinking shut off? The moment your brain said, this is easier, just believe it. Psychologists have studied this for decades, and the pattern is clear. People tend to be most confident not when they're most accurate, but when they've stopped considering alternatives. In studies on eyewitness testimony, for example, the most confident witnesses are often the least reliable, not because they're lying, but because their memory has locked in an answer and refuses to reopen the file. In the Dunning-Kruger effect, we see this even more starkly. Those with the least knowledge often feel the most sure, because they lack the awareness to question themselves. Their certainty is not a product of insight, it's a symptom of blindness. But it's not just about knowledge, it's about identity, because certainty becomes a personality trait, a shield, a way to feel secure in a world that constantly shifts beneath your feet. And once a belief is tied to your identity, challenging it feels like a threat, not to your opinion, but to your selfhood. So your brain defends it, not with logic, but with certainty. You start ignoring information that contradicts you. You surround yourself with people who agree with you. You twist data, cherry-pick stories, reinterpret facts, not to deceive others, but to protect yourself from the unbearable discomfort of not knowing. It happens in politics, in relationships, in science, in self-perception. You tell yourself, they're wrong. I know what happened. This is just how it is. And in that moment, you feel strong, secure. But you may also be wrong and unable to see it. This is why the most dangerous people are often the most certain, the ones who speak with absolute conviction, who never pause, who never say, I could be wrong, because they're not operating in the realm of truth. They're operating in the realm of mental closure. And mental closure feels good, but it comes at a cost. You lose the capacity to learn. You lose the ability to grow. You trap yourself in echo chambers, internal and external. And over time, the distance between what's true and what you believe can grow into a chasm. So, what's the way out? You don't kill certainty, you make peace with doubt. You learn to hold beliefs loosely, to replace I know with I'm learning, to treat confidence not as proof of accuracy, but as a cue to check again. You start asking, what if I'm wrong? What evidence would change my mind? When did I stop questioning this? And most importantly, is my certainty helping me see the world or just shielding me from it? Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you don't know, that you're still figuring it out, that your beliefs are flexible, evolving, alive. Doubt isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It means your mind is still open, that your self-worth isn't tied to being right, but to being real. Kiwao. And realness isn't certainty, it's curiosity. So the next time you feel that surge of, I'm right, pause, breathe. Consider that you might be standing at the very edge of your own blind spot, that your confidence might be the symptom of a thought that went unchallenged too long. Because truth doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear it, you must first stop yelling. The question. Suppression effect. You've probably experienced it, but never noticed. A strange question flashes across your mind, something that challenges your assumptions, your past, your beliefs, a crack in your understanding. But before you can even explore it, it vanishes. Not pushed aside, erased, forgotten like a dream at dawn. This is the question suppression effect, and it happens more often than you think. Your brain isn't just an answer machine, it's a survival system. It rewards clarity, patterns, predictability. So when you encounter a question that threatens those things, something unanswerable or destabilizing, it quietly deletes it, not maliciously, protectively. Confusion, after all, takes energy. Uncertainty makes you hesitate. And in an evolutionary sense, hesitation could once get you killed. Imagine asking yourself, why do I believe this? Or, what if my memories aren't accurate? Or, am I the same person I was 10 years ago? These questions wobble the frame of reality. They invite cognitive dissonance. And your brain, ever efficient, often chooses emotional safety over intellectual discomfort. It does this by hiding the question behind a wall of mental static. You forget you even asked. It's not stupidity, it's efficiency. If every question stayed, you'd collapse under the weight of endless doubt. So the brain, like an editor, trims the script, keeps only what serves narrative continuity. It wants you to feel coherent, even if it means quietly silencing thoughts that don't fit. But this comes at a cost, because some of those questions aren't dangerous, they're transformative. They're the seeds of awakening, of reinvention, of clarity that breaks old chains. And when they're suppressed, your growth stalls. You move through life narrating a story that's missing its boldest lines. Ever wondered why some questions haunt you years later, out of nowhere? That's not random. That's a suppressed question resurfacing when your mind finally feels safe enough to face it. A moment of silence, a breakup, a near-death experience. Suddenly, the question returns, and it demands your attention, not as a threat, but as a mirror. So how do we work with this effect? We start by noticing the flicker, the momentary disturbance, the question that enters and feels uncomfortable. Instead of swatting it away, write it down, give it a name, make it visible, let it breathe. You don't have to answer it, just honor its presence. Then create space for confusion, not as a flaw, but as a doorway. Some of the wisest insights come not from clarity, but from sitting inside the unknown long enough to hear what it whispers. And most of all, be gentle with yourself. Your mind is not broken for forgetting questions, it's trying to protect you. But now, you can choose to protect your growth too. Let the questions stay, even when they scare you, especially when they do. Take Daniel, for example, a philosophy student who one night asked himself, what if free will is an illusion? The question chilled him. He shut his book, distracted himself with noise. Weeks later, he couldn't even recall what had disturbed him so deeply. It wasn't that the idea lacked merit. It was that his entire identity, his pride and personal responsibility, his achievements, his relationships, rested on the belief that his choices were his own. That one question threatened the foundation, so his mind quietly buried it. Or Maya. She once caught herself thinking, what if I never truly loved him, just needed someone to need me? It was a painful thought, a disruptive one, so her brain buried it under nostalgia and busyness. For years, she told the story of their love the way others wanted to hear it, until one night, alone with wine and silence, the question returned, and this time, it didn't let go. We don't erase questions consciously. The suppression is quiet, automatic. Questions like, what happens after death? Am I living someone else's dream? What if I'm wrong about who I am? These are not casual curiosities. They're identity disruptors, and your brain, built to maintain equilibrium, often pushes them into the mental attic. Neurologically, it makes sense. The brain seeks cognitive closure. When a question arises with no clear path to resolution, it triggers a low-grade stress response. It opens loops your mind can't close. Rather than spiral in ambiguity, the brain builds shortcuts. It edits the memory. It neutralizes the signal. And you move on, without realizing something essential just went missing. But the cost? You trade truth for peace, growth for comfort, authenticity for stability. And over time, those suppressed questions become symptoms. They leak through in anxiety, restlessness, dreams, or even illness. The unasked becomes the unresolved, and the unresolved shapes who you become. What if the reason you feel stuck isn't because you don't have answers, but because you've forgotten the right questions? The solution isn't to force clarity. It's to create spaces safe enough for the questions to emerge. Spaces without judgment, without urgency. A journal, a long walk, a deep conversation, therapy, solitude. These are not luxuries. They are excavation sites for the questions your mind tried to bury. And when those questions come, resist the urge to resolve them. Let them sit with you like guests you don't fully understand. Some of them won't lead to answers. They'll lead to awareness, to presence, to a deeper intimacy with yourself. It's okay not to know. It's okay to wonder. It's okay to live inside the question. Because sometimes the act of asking is more honest than any answer you were taught to recite. So when a strange, unsettling thought brushes past you, pause. Trace its edges. Ask why it scares you. Ask why it disappeared so quickly. Ask if maybe, just maybe, your mind is protecting you from something you're now strong enough to face. Don't chase answers. Chase awareness. And when the unanswerable returns, welcome it. That's not confusion. That's transformation. The puzzle completion bias. Your mind doesn't like blank spaces. When something's missing, context, meaning, motive, it fills it in. Not with truth, but with what makes sense to you. This is the puzzle completion bias. A mental shortcut where your brain completes the story before it's finished, where half-truths are rounded out with assumptions, where silence becomes suspicion, where ambiguity becomes evidence. Not because it is, but because it feels complete. You don't do this consciously. It's not a flaw. It's a function. Your brain is wired to seek patterns, to close loops, to finish puzzles, and when the pieces aren't all there, it uses memory, emotion, and past experience to guess what fits. But the guess feels like truth, so you don't question it, you just believe it. And that's the danger, because now you're living inside a completed story that might be entirely wrong. Imagine this. A friend doesn't text back for days. You feel a twist in your chest. You start thinking, they're upset with me. I must have said something wrong. Maybe they're done with me. You picture the distance, the judgment, the end of connection. But in reality, they were sick, or busy, or lost in their own spiral. Still, your mind filled in the silence with a story of rejection. And now, you act accordingly. You pull away. You mirror coldness. You create the very outcome you feared, based on a fictional narrative your brain finished without evidence. This happens constantly. You walk past someone who doesn't smile, and your brain says, they don't like me. You get critical feedback, and your brain hears, I'm a failure. You feel anxious, and your brain concludes, something bad is about to happen. None of this is guaranteed. None of it is proven. But the pieces fit. The puzzle looks real, so you trust it. This bias even warps memory. When you remember an old event, especially one that felt unresolved, your mind fills in what you think must have happened. The words you imagine they were thinking, the tone you recall hearing, even if it was never said, never done, never meant. But now, it feels true. And in the brain, feeling is often stronger than fact. The puzzle completion bias also feeds conflict. Someone says something vague, you interpret it as aggression. They leave something out, you assume the worst. They say, I need space, you assume abandonment. So you react not to what is, but to the story you constructed around what's missing. You become emotionally tangled in a narrative you wrote, directed, and now star in without ever confirming the script. And all of it began with a blank your brain was desperate to fill. Take Maya. Her boss cancels a meeting last minute, no explanation. She assumes she's in trouble, that she's being pushed out. She starts spiraling, prepping for damage control. A week later, she finds out the boss had a personal emergency and never thought twice about her performance. But for that week, Maya lived in a reality built on imagined consequences. Or take Josh. His partner comes home quiet one night. Josh remembers his last breakup, how the silence came before the end. So he panics, assumes emotional distance, starts shutting down. The partner, meanwhile, was just tired from work, but now there's real distance, created by a false story. This is how relationships unravel, not from facts, but from assumed motives, imagined intentions, conclusions built from incomplete data. So, what's the way out? Slow down the puzzle. When something feels almost complete, pause. Ask, what do I know for sure? What am I assuming? What story am I building? And why? This pause is everything, because it makes space between reality and interpretation. You can say, they haven't replied, without adding because they hate me. You can think, that moment felt off, without deciding I'm being rejected. You can notice the gap and let it stay a gap. Incomplete stories don't have to be finished. Some puzzles are better left open. And here's the truth. The ability to tolerate uncertainty is a superpower. When you stop rushing to finish every emotional equation, you begin to experience life as it is, not as your fear paints it. And that's where peace lives. Not in the finished puzzle, but in your willingness to say, I don't know yet. And that's okay. The habit skeleton illusion. Most of what you do isn't a decision. It's a reflex. That's the habit skeleton illusion. You think you're choosing your actions, but most of the time, your body has already started moving before your mind catches up. You feel like you chose, but you only approved something that was already happening. The brain loves habits, not because they're good, but because they're efficient. Habits live in the basal ganglia, the brain's autopilot system. Once a pattern is learned, how to brush your teeth, how to react to a tone of voice, how to start your morning routine, it gets stored as a loop. Cue, routine, reward. You don't wake up every day and decide how to tie your shoes. You just do it. But here's the thing. The same loop runs for emotional habits too. You don't decide to flinch when someone raises their voice. That's an old pattern. You don't choose to numb out when overwhelmed. That's muscle memory from pain. You don't pause to evaluate every sarcastic response, dismissive shrug, or comforting ritual. You just move, like a skeleton dancing to music it no longer hears. That's the illusion. You feel in control, but really, you're reacting through pre-wired scripts. Habit isn't just repetition. It's identity disguised as instinct. And over time, your habits become your personality. Are you patient? Or were you trained to wait silently out of fear? Are you confident? Or just skilled at masking anxiety? Are you calm, or have you numbed every trigger to survive? When your nervous system repeats the same loops long enough, they feel like you. But often, they're just ghosts of what used to protect you, still moving your hands, shaping your words, guiding your steps. It's the skeleton of survival, and it moves long after the danger is gone. You're not just living your life, you're reenacting it. Over and over. That one argument you replay in your head, it shapes how you speak now. That childhood wound, it controls what feels safe in your relationships. Your body holds that memory, not as thought, but as motion. You think you're avoiding triggers, but sometimes you are the trigger. Because old habits wear grooves into your perception. You flinch before anyone raises their voice. You dismiss love before it feels too real. You sabotage peace before it feels too quiet. It's not weakness, it's choreography. Your body has rehearsed this dance for years, and breaking it isn't about thinking differently, it's about moving differently. Neuroscience tells us neurons that fire together wire together. So every time you respond in the same way, the circuit grows stronger. Every time you speak over discomfort with a joke, or shrink when asked your opinion, or say yes when you mean no, you're not just choosing, you're reinforcing the skeleton. But the good news? Neurons can rewire. Habits can break. It starts with noticing. The half-second pause before the habit kicks in. The tension in your shoulders. The breath you hold. The words you nearly speak out of instinct. That's where freedom lives. Not in forcing change, but in witnessing the moment you're about to repeat yourself and choosing otherwise. Tiny rewrites. That's how the skeleton falls apart. Because it's not alive. It's just memory. You are the one who is alive. You are the one who chooses what to keep and what to finally let die. You might think the hard part is waking up to your patterns, but the truth is, the hard part is continuing to choose something new when the old groove feels so easy. Even exhaustion is familiar. Even sabotage feels like home. And the habit skeleton whispers, "This is who we are." But it's not. You are not your survival loops. You are not the old program running under your skin. You are not the reflex that stopped questioning itself. You are what interrupts it. You are the pause, the breath, the rewrite, the whisper in the brain that says, maybe I don't have to flinch this time. Maybe I don't have to shrink. Maybe I don't have to repeat what broke me just because it's comfortable. And when that whisper becomes a sentence, then a pattern, then a new skeleton of strength built from awareness and softness and truth, then you've done something few people ever do. You've reprogrammed instinct. You've become conscious where others are mechanical. You've chosen life where others relive the past. That's what healing is. It's not magic. It's messy. It's frustrating. It's slow. But it's real. And one day, you'll look back and realize you haven't danced the old dance in months. You'll catch yourself standing still, not shrinking. Speaking, not silencing. Choosing, not repeating. And that will be the moment you know the skeleton is gone, and what's left is you. Not the version built from pain, not the ghost that danced for approval, but the real one, alive in their own rhythm, choosing each step as if it mattered, because it does. Even now the habit tries to return, but now you see it, and what you see, you can change, not instantly, but intentionally. One step, one breath, one new choice at a time. Context dependency fracture. Imagine walking into a room and feeling your posture shift. Your voice changes slightly. You laugh at things you normally wouldn't. You nod along to ideas that don't fully align with your values. Not out of malice, not out of deceit, but because, without realizing it, you're morphing, subtly becoming the person the room expects you to be. This is the context dependency fracture, a psychological phenomenon so familiar we often miss it. We think we're consistent. We believe we know who we are. But in truth, the self is a mirror, reflecting whatever is asked of it, whatever is safest in that particular context. You become one version of yourself around your parents, another with your friends, another entirely in professional spaces. Sometimes, you even change between friends. You can be bold in one room, quiet in another, warm with one group, emotionally distant in the next. These changes aren't pretend. They're survival mechanisms, built over years of experience and reinforced by reward or rejection. Some people grow up in environments where being agreeable was safer than being authentic, so their brain learned, adapt or be punished. Others were praised for being easygoing, never realizing that the praise was actually for suppressing their own boundaries. This fracture begins young. Maybe you had to become the peacemaker in a chaotic home, or the achiever in a neglectful one. Maybe you were the comic relief to distract from tension, the quiet one so you wouldn't be noticed. And over time, the roles blurred into identities. You no longer knew where the role ended and where you began. Then you grow up and realize you don't feel whole. You feel fragmented. There are versions of you scattered across every space you've ever entered, pieces left behind like ghost imprints in old rooms. And every time you shift, you wonder, is this still me? The paradox is this: none of those selves are fake, but none of them are whole either. They are context-activated fragments of a deeper, central self that rarely gets full expression. And here's where it gets painful. Sometimes you return to a room where you used to be small, and you shrink again. Not because you are still small, but because the room remembers that version of you, and your nervous system remembers too. You regress without knowing. You silence yourself without choosing. You fracture without intent. This is why healing is difficult. It's not just about what happened. It's about where it happened. And those places, those dynamics, those invisible expectations, they still exist. You can grow outside the room, but the moment you re-enter, the fracture reactivates. It's also why growth can feel so lonely. You outgrow roles that people still expect you to play. You set boundaries in rooms where you were never allowed to have them. You speak up in places that trained you to be silent. And suddenly, you're different. You're difficult. You're not like you used to be. Of course you're not. You're trying to be whole, but the world prefers your fragments. It's easier to manage a version of you than the full spectrum, so society encourages the fracture. Be professional. Be polite. Don't be too much. These are all ways of saying contort yourself to make others comfortable, and if you do it long enough, you forget the shape you were before. But here's the truth you must remember. Consistency doesn't mean rigidity. It means integrity. You can be adaptive without being fractured. You can shift tones without losing your voice. You can honor the context without betraying your core. And that core? It's still in you. It's the quiet self who doesn't perform, the one who whispers when the roles get too loud, the one who aches when you pretend too long. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be heard. To break the context dependency fracture, you don't need to be the same in every room. You just need to bring the same truth with you, even if it speaks differently. You can be humorous in one space, serious in another, soft here, assertive there. But underneath it all, there should be a through line, a signal that says, this is still me. I'm not vanishing. I'm just flowing. Because when you live only in fragments, you spend your life adjusting mirrors. But when you start to live from your core, you stop reflecting and start radiating. And the rooms that can't hold your wholeness, let them be too small. You were never meant to shrink to fit them anyway. Think of the way certain clothing makes you feel. How a uniform, a suit, or even a childhood sweatshirt brings out different emotional responses. Context isn't just mental, it's embodied. You walk differently, speak differently, carry yourself with a posture that matches who you believe you're supposed to be in that outfit, in that place. Now, stretch that idea further. What if every job you've had, every relationship, every social media persona you've crafted, what if they've each pulled you further from center? Not because they're bad, but because they're incomplete. Partial truths, repeated enough times, become your reality. You tell yourself you're an introvert, but maybe you're just quiet in rooms that don't feel safe. You say you're a helper, but maybe that's because your worth was only validated through service. You claim you're resilient, but perhaps that's just another mask for suppression. And the longer you wear it, the more the real self forgets how to breathe. Some people live their entire lives like this, like a method actor who never steps off stage. Their sense of identity so entangled in performance that the silence of solitude feels unbearable. Because in solitude, no one is watching, and without an audience, the self collapses. But the irony: your truest self shows up not when you're being watched, but when you're alone and still choose authenticity. When no one is clapping and you still keep speaking. When no one is asking and you still tell the truth. The fracture doesn't mean you're fake. It means you were adaptive. It means you survived. But now, It's time to reunite the fragments, not to erase the roles, but to integrate them, to bring the laughter of one room into the depth of another, to stop hiding your intelligence for fear of being too much, to stop dimming your light just because someone else finds it blinding. You don't need to be different people. You just need to be all of you in every room. And that starts with asking, which version of me do I trust enough to lead the way back home? Sleep fragment identity effect. You wake up and think the dream is gone, but it's not. It lingers in the texture of your thoughts, in the shape of your emotions, in the small decisions you make without knowing why. A strange quiet pulls at your mind. A familiar unease follows you into the day. And yet, when you try to recall the dream, there's nothing. Just a feeling, a shadow, a ghost of meaning without memory. This is the sleep fragment identity effect. You are not just who you are when you're awake. You are shaped by moments your conscious mind never caught. Dreams bleed into wakefulness like ink in water, diffuse, invisible, but still staining everything beneath the surface. Neuroscientists have long known that the sleeping brain is not idle. In REM sleep, the brain is as active as when you're awake, processing emotions, rehearsing scenarios, confronting fears, exploring impossible realities. But the majority of these mental events never reach your conscious memory. In fact, over 90% of dream content is forgotten within minutes of waking. Still, the effect remains. Your mood shifts. You wake up feeling strange, hollow, or hopeful. You avoid someone without knowing why. You say yes to something impulsively. You pause at a street corner and feel déjà vu, but nothing looks familiar. These aren't random glitches. They are echoes, traces of dreams your waking mind can't retrieve, but your deeper self still remembers. Think of it like emotional jet lag. Your subconscious traveled somewhere while you slept. It lived an entire narrative. Maybe it lost someone. Maybe it was betrayed. Maybe it soared. And now it's back. But disoriented, like it's still unpacking the experience while your waking self rushes off to make coffee and answer emails. You may believe you're fully awake, but part of you is still dreaming, still reacting, still negotiating meaning from a story that vanished with the morning light. In trauma therapy, patients often report waking with intense emotions they can't explain, sadness with no trigger, guilt without context, a fear they didn't fall asleep with. This isn't imaginary. It's the residue of dream processing gone unremembered. The emotional brain doesn't care whether the event was real. If it felt real, it leaves a mark. Even in healthy minds, dream fragments subtly alter personality over time. They influence creative thinking, intuitive choices, and emotional associations. A painter may choose a strange color palette. A musician might write a haunting melody they can't trace. A child may develop an irrational fear of drowning after repeated water dreams they'll never recall. This is where it gets deeper. What if your dreams are not just noise, but a form of subconscious rehearsal? What if each night your brain runs simulations not just to discharge emotion, but to shape identity? In one dream, you betray someone. In another, you save them. In one, you're abandoned. In another, you're loved. You don't remember the plot, but the emotional residue becomes part of you. And slowly, over months and years, these fragments accumulate, sculpting behaviors, bending thought patterns, changing how you relate to the world. You are a collection of remembered moments and unremembered dreams. And yet, we rarely question how much our waking choices are influenced by these invisible narratives. We assume that forgetting a dream means it's gone. But forgetting is not the same as being unaffected. Your body remembers. Your emotional reflexes remember. Your shadow self remembers. Ever woken up angry at someone without knowing why? Or decided something felt off, but couldn't explain it? Or had a sudden inspiration that made no logical sense but just felt right? These are all possible signals of dream residue guiding your present. The sleep fragment identity effect suggests a profound truth. You are never fully conscious of why you are the way you are. You're not just the author of your life, You're also the character who only remembers parts of the script. And that's not failure. That's reality. Your brain, magnificent and mysterious, is always working behind the curtain, always stitching narratives in the dark. Some you'll remember, most you won't, but all of them leave fingerprints. So what do you do with this? You listen to your mornings, not just your thoughts, but your felt sense. You notice the emotional weather of your waking hours. You track patterns in your mood, even if they seem unearned. You allow your intuition to have a voice, even when logic has none. You respect the dream self, not because it's always right, but because it's always honest. Because the next time you hesitate before trusting someone, or walk into a room and feel dread, or take a leap without understanding why, it might not be a random impulse. It might be the echo of something you learned in a dream you'll never remember. And maybe, just maybe, part of your identity, the part you can't explain, is built from stories whispered in the dark. Thought investment fallacy. You've poured hours, maybe years, into a belief, a project, a way of seeing the world. And then, you feel it slipping. Cracks appear. Evidence piles up. The idea, the one you built your foundation on, might be wrong. But instead of letting go, you grip tighter. Why? Because you invested too much to walk away. This is the thought investment fallacy, and it controls more of your life than you think. Imagine someone who spent 10 years writing a book based on a theory that love is purely chemical. Then, they fall in love in a way that defies that theory, messy, irrational, beyond explanation. They don't throw out the book. They double down. Why? Because admitting the book is wrong means admitting the time was wasted, and that feels unbearable. This fallacy isn't about stupidity, it's about survival. Your brain hates loss, especially the loss of effort, identity, and meaning. The more time and energy you spend on something, the more valuable it feels. But that value is emotional, not logical. We assume effort equals truth, but often, effort equals attachment. You defend a belief, not because it's right, but because it cost you years to believe it. You hold on to a failed dream, not because it's working, but because walking away would make you confront regret. And regret is one of the brain's most painful emotions. But here's the twist. The longer you defend the wrong idea, the deeper the hole. You keep investing in a lie because you don't want the first investment to be for nothing. It's the same trap gamblers fall into. They lose, but they keep betting to justify the original bet. They're not playing to win. They're playing not to lose. The thought investment fallacy shows up in relationships, careers, religions, politics, even personal identities. You once believed something. You taught it, preached it, built your persona around it. So when new evidence arrives, you suppress it. Not because you hate truth, but because you fear collapse. But here's the secret. Collapse is clarity. Letting go of the wrong idea doesn't erase the journey. It dignifies it. It says, I was brave enough to learn. Growth isn't staying loyal to outdated thoughts. It's updating them, even when it hurts. Let go. Not because the past didn't matter, but because the future deserves your honesty. That's not giving up. That's evolution. Let's take Sarah, for instance. She spent 7 years building her wellness brand on a philosophy she inherited, one that blamed all illness on negative thinking. At first, it gave her a sense of power, control, even community. But slowly, she began to see the cracks. People who followed every affirmation still got sick. Others felt shamed by her words. Deep down, she knew something didn't add up. But admitting the flaw meant tearing down her entire identity. So she defended it, not from ignorance, but from emotional debt. This is the prison of thought investment. The idea that because something took effort, it must be defended. We rarely admit how much identity we weld to belief. You believed in hard work, in justice, in loyalty. Then the world gave you a counterexample. Instead of updating the idea, you distort the world to match it. Because rewriting your belief feels like erasing who you are. But the paradox is this. The more we invest in defending the wrong idea, the more damage we cause, not just to others, but to ourselves. We become inflexible, rigid, easily offended. Because deep down, we know the belief is fragile, and fragile things break under scrutiny. Cognitive dissonance is the engine behind this fallacy. That queasy tension when facts collide with belief, and your brain, instead of resolving it with truth, often resolves it with denial. It's easier to doubt new evidence than to dismantle a worldview. Think of flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, or, more quietly, think of the parent who insists their child is fine, even when the school says otherwise, or the employee who stays at a toxic job because they've already given it 10 years. I can't quit now, they say. I've worked too hard. That sentence hides a fear. If I leave, what does that say about who I've been? But you are not your past beliefs. You are the awareness that observes them. Changing your mind isn't weakness. It's the ultimate act of mental strength. Your brain is plastic. It adapts. It upgrades. But only if you let it. You're allowed to say, I was wrong. You're allowed to outgrow what once felt true. You're allowed to mourn the effort without defending the outcome. What matters most is not what you believed, but whether you kept learning. Ask yourself, what beliefs am I defending not because they're right, but because I'm afraid of what I'll lose if I release them? That fear is real. It deserves compassion, but it doesn't deserve control. Truth doesn't ask for loyalty. It asks for openness. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is say, I see the cost, and I choose clarity anyway. Because no matter how much you've invested in a thought, freedom will always be worth more. The repair loop compulsion. Your brain keeps circling the same thought, again and again, like a record with a scratch, a sentence half finished, a door that won't close. You try to let it go, but it clings to your awareness. You try to distract yourself, but it finds its way back. It loops, and loops, and loops. This is the repair loop compulsion, the quiet engine of anxiety, not always loud, not always explosive, but persistent, obsessive, exhausting. It begins with a moment that didn't resolve. Maybe you left a conversation feeling misunderstood. Maybe you didn't hit send on that message. Maybe someone's tone felt off, and your brain interpreted it as danger. Maybe you made a decision that doesn't sit right, and you're haunted by what you should have done instead. Your body keeps going, but your mind stays behind, trying to repair something it believes is still open, unfinished, unhealed. And until it closes that loop, it won't stop spinning. This is why anxiety isn't always about the future. Sometimes, it's the echo of a past event your brain hasn't processed emotionally. The brain hates open tabs, so it loops them, like background apps you didn't know were still running, taking up memory, draining energy, stealing your peace. And the loop doesn't just stay mental, it becomes physical. Tight chest, rapid heartbeat, intrusive thoughts, irrational urgency, and always the question, why can't I just move on? Because your nervous system doesn't want you to move on. It wants you to fix it. But here's the paradox. You often can't. You can't go back and unsay something. You can't make someone hear you the way you wanted to be heard. You can't redo that moment where you chose safety over truth. So, your mind loops instead, hoping that enough repetition will create closure. But closure doesn't come from replaying. It comes from releasing. And release only happens when the brain feels safe enough to let go of the unfinished task. That's what this is. Not a broken mind, but a mind trying to repair something it believes is still fractured. Imagine Mila. She left a relationship a year ago. Logically, she knows it was the right decision, but her brain replays their final argument nightly. Why? Because she didn't say everything she wanted to, and now that unsaid truth has become an open loop. Her mind replays it to try and complete it, but the moment is gone, and her anxiety lingers. Or Theo, who sent an email he now regrets. He keeps checking for a reply, keeps drafting imaginary follow-ups in his head, keeps wondering what they're thinking, not because he wants attention, but because his brain feels like the story isn't over. The loop won't stop until it feels repaired, but that repair may never come. This is why people with anxiety often obsess over details, overthink conversations, or need reassurance long after something is done, because emotionally, it isn't. And the brain doesn't distinguish between emotional closure and task completion. If a feeling didn't resolve, the mind treats it like an unfinished chore. So what can you do? First, recognize the loop for what it is. A system trying to protect you, not punish you. Your brain is not broken. It's just searching for the exit sign. Second, give the loop what it's really asking for: emotional validation, not logic. You don't have to prove the thought wrong. You have to feel what wasn't felt. Say, yes, I felt hurt. Yes, I felt unseen. Yes, I didn't get to finish that thought. Yes, I wish I had handled that differently. When you name it with compassion, the loop loosens. And third, practice incomplete endings. Not everything needs closure. Not every feeling needs to be solved. Some things must be mourned instead of repaired. And that's okay. The loop will try to pull you back, but you can whisper back, "It's over. I survived. I choose peace now," not because the story wrapped up perfectly, but because you decided to stop chasing a finish line that doesn't exist. The repair loop doesn't end with resolution. It ends with permission. The permission to leave the sentence unfinished, to walk away from the echo, to close the door even if it creaks, and to say, "I don't need to fix everything to be free." Approval simulation bias. Before you speak, you run a simulation, not of truth, but of approval. That's the core of approval simulation bias. You don't just ask yourself what you want to say. You ask what they will think. You ask how it will sound. You ask if it will make them leave, or frown, or laugh, or pull back. And often, they're not even in the room, because your mind is filled with ghosts. Not the supernatural kind, but the remembered, imagined, projected versions of people whose approval you once needed to survive. Your parents, your ex, your boss, your friend group, the person who judged you in 7th grade. And so you pause, and the pause is where it happens. In that tiny mental flicker, you adjust. You soften your voice. You reshape the opinion. You say what won't cause waves. You abandon the original sentence before it even forms. You've already simulated their reaction. You've already decided it's safer to please them than to be honest, even if they aren't real anymore, even if they never truly listened, even if the version you're simulating isn't even accurate, it still edits you. That's the trap. You don't know who you are because you're always editing for an imaginary audience. You're not living, you're performing. Neuroscience backs this up. Your brain contains a network called the default mode network. It's active when you're not doing anything in particular, just thinking. And a large part of its job? Predicting social scenarios. It builds mental models of how people would respond if you acted a certain way. You do it so automatically, you don't notice. But your brain rehearses the script of approval dozens of times a day. You don't speak first, you filter. You don't act freely, you calculate. And it makes sense. Once, approval meant safety. Belonging meant survival. The tribe had to like you or you wouldn't last long. But the modern version? It's broken. Now, you delay decisions waiting for applause that will never come. You abandon your art, your truth, your weirdness, because you don't know how to stand alone in disapproval. You give up your boundaries to win validation from people you secretly resent. You pretend to be less, to avoid being too much. It's a simulation, a never-ending movie where you're both actor and audience, constantly guessing what scene would win the crowd. But there is no crowd, only ghosts, only echoes, only rehearsals of rejections you haven't even risked yet. And those rehearsals cost you everything. You don't just lose moments, you lose identity. You forget what you wanted before you edited it. You forget what you believed before someone rolled their eyes. You forget how to feel okay without confirmation. And you call it maturity. You call it being realistic. You call it kindness, humility, tact. But really, It's fear. The fear of being too much, too loud, too needy, too soft, too emotional, too different. So you shrink, and shrinking becomes a habit. The world gets narrower every time you trade authenticity for imagined approval, until one day you realize the people you were trying to please never even knew you. They only knew the version you shaped to avoid rejection. And still, some rejected you anyway. That's the wound. That's the awakening. That's where everything can change. Because if rejection is possible either way, you might as well show up as your real self. You might as well stop simulating. You might as well stop rehearsing and start risking. The approval you need won't come from the ghosts. It comes from your own reflection. When you speak without shrinking, act without explanation, stand without apology. That moment, that's real power. The power to end the simulation and live. It won't happen overnight. You'll still feel the pull, the reflex to rehearse, the instinct to check the room, even if there's no one in it. That's what survival taught you. That's what your nervous system memorized. But with practice, it loosens. One truth at a time. One moment of saying what you really meant. One boundary held. One silence not filled just to make someone else comfortable. And in that space, the space where the simulation would normally play, you'll feel it. Terror, then freedom, grief, then clarity. You'll grieve the years spent auditioning. You'll grieve the self you abandoned for applause. But then you'll meet someone new. The version of you who doesn't need rehearsal. The one who speaks, acts, laughs, cries, moves. Not to win approval, but to live honestly. That's who you were before the simulation began. And that's who you're becoming again. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And finally, free. You don't have to please the ghosts. You just have to stop abandoning yourself for people who were never watching. Let the simulation end. Let the real you begin. Say the thing. Pause the performance. Watch the silence not kill you. And in that stillness, watch your real life begin. Not the rehearsed one, the real one. The reality construction delay. Imagine you're walking down the street and someone glances your way. In less than a second, your mind tells you what happened. They looked at you with curiosity, or judgment, or maybe familiarity. But what if none of that was true? Not immediately. What if, in that tiny delay between seeing and interpreting, reality bent to fit the meaning your brain needed most? This is the reality construction delay. It's not science fiction. It's cognitive science. Every moment you experience has already happened by the time you become conscious of it. Your brain receives light, sound, movement, processes it, assigns meaning, makes predictions, and only then lets you feel like you just witnessed something in real time. But that witnessing is a trick of timing. Your perception is not a raw feed. It's a rendered scene. The world you think you're living in isn't the world as it is. It's the world as your nervous system edited it milliseconds ago. The brain prioritizes survival over accuracy, so it patches gaps in perception, rewinds and replays signals, and smooths over chaos to give you a digestible version of what just occurred. This delay is why illusions work, why optical tricks fool even the most intelligent minds, why magicians can manipulate your attention and redirect your memory. It's because you're not perceiving now. You're perceiving just after now, with a brain desperate to make sense of noise, but the implications go deeper. Every time you enter a room, see a face, hear a phrase, your brain doesn't just record what happened, it constructs it. A person's tone of voice, your emotional state, past trauma, even blood sugar, all of it distorts the truth you believe you saw. You may think someone ignored you, but maybe they didn't see you. You may believe you were snubbed, but maybe your own delay in response created an awkward pause that your brain interpreted as rejection. The delay isn't just neural, it's emotional. Meaning doesn't arrive with the moment. It's stitched on afterward. Your childhood memories aren't fixed. They're retrofitted with the emotions you carry now. A bad breakup changes how you remember the first date. A lost friendship reframes years of laughter. Your brain goes back and rewrites the movie every time you watch it. This is how perception becomes prison. Because you trust what you see, but what you see was already filtered. You trust how you feel, but those feelings are echoes, reactions to meanings you didn't realize you assigned in the delay. That moment when someone said something rude, was it rude, or did your brain, primed by shame or history, insert that flavor to protect your identity? In trauma, this delay can expand. You become hypervigilant. Your brain tries to speed up prediction by assuming the worst. You walk into a room and scan it before you feel it. You anticipate betrayal before anyone even speaks. You see shadows before there's light. And then, to make the prediction feel real, your nervous system colors the moment with confirmation. You tense your shoulders, change your tone, and the other person responds in kind, fulfilling the prophecy. Not because it was true, but because the delay was flooded with fear. But here's the beautiful twist. Just as the brain can distort, it can also rewire. Awareness of the delay is power. It allows you to pause, to question, to not react with absolute certainty, to say, wait, is this what happened, or is this how I made sense of what happened? This single pause breaks the loop. It invites nuance back into the narrative. It turns judgment into curiosity. It gives you a second chance to meet reality without the immediate filter of past wounds. Therapists use this gap to help people change. Mindfulness practitioners call it the sacred pause. Neuroscientists call it postdictive processing. Philosophers call it phenomenology. But whatever the name, the truth is the same. Your reality is constructed in delay, and if you become aware of that delay, you regain the power to reauthor your experience. Because you are not just the perceiver, you are the editor. And in a world built on reflex, choosing to revise, even for a split second, is one of the most powerful acts of freedom. So the next time something feels instant, remember, there was a delay, a gap, a frame between the stimulus and the story. And inside that frame, you can choose. You can choose to not let old fears narrate new moments. You can choose to not trust every thought your brain inserts in the name of safety. You can choose, finally, to see, not just with eyes, but with awareness. And that's when reality stops being a trap of the past and starts becoming a space you can actually live in. Think about those moments when you're convinced someone is angry with you, not because they said anything, but because your body reacted to a small cue, a pause, a glance, a shift in energy. What if that wasn't their emotion at all, but your past echoing forward? Your nervous system, remembering an old wound, inserting a label into that delay. And now, you don't just perceive, they become the enemy in a story you've already written. We see this everywhere. In arguments where neither side heard the other's intent, only their own assumptions. In relationships where love is mistaken for danger because kindness once preceded abuse. In classrooms where a child zones out, not because they don't care, but because the delay between shame and correction has taught them silence is safer than engagement. The delay is where your history hijacks your present. And when you begin to live in that space, defending against imagined threats, reacting to emotional edits, you're no longer responding to the world. You're responding to your ghost of it. But you can become aware. You can trace it in real time. You can say, this discomfort I feel, maybe it's not what just happened. Maybe it's what my body thinks happened, because of what it's felt before. This is the crack where healing begins. You begin to notice that not every delayed meaning needs to become a belief, that sometimes stillness is safer than reaction, that maybe the person you feared is simply someone you hadn't given enough pause to understand, that maybe you are someone you haven't paused long enough to hear. The delay isn't your enemy, it's your invitation to step off autopilot, to disarm the reflex, to ask deeper questions of your moment, because perception isn't truth, it's a story told slightly late. And now, you hold the pen, the highlight reel. Bias. You think you remember your life accurately, but you don't. You remember moments, peaks, crashes, the edges where emotion bled through everything. The rest? It vanishes. Not because it wasn't real, but because your brain didn't think it was worth keeping. This is the highlight reel bias. Your memory is not a recording device. It's an emotional editor. It doesn't archive days. It captures intensity, the highest highs, the lowest lows, the scenes that made your heart race or ache. That left a mark. That disrupted the rhythm of ordinary, because the ordinary gets deleted. You won't remember what you had for lunch last Tuesday, but you'll remember the meal where someone said they were leaving you, or the dinner when you laughed so hard it felt like flying, or the afternoon a stranger made you cry with a sentence they didn't know would break you. You'll remember your graduation day, but not the weeks of quiet study before it. You'll remember the moment someone kissed you for the first time, but not the hundreds of times they passed you in a hallway with no glance. You'll remember the fight that ended everything, but not the countless calm nights that led up to it. Memory is a spotlight, and it points where emotion screams loudest. This isn't a glitch, it's efficiency. Your brain isn't built to remember everything. It's built to remember what felt important, and importance to the mind is emotion. When your heart spikes, your memory records. When your soul stirs, your brain hits save. The mundane, it dissolves, not because it's meaningless, but because it lacks drama. And this is where the bias begins. Because over time, your memory becomes a highlight reel of emotional extremes, the heartbreaks, the breakthroughs, the chaos, the euphoria, the trauma, the milestones, the cliffs, the fireworks. So when you look back, your life seems more dramatic than it really was. It feels like a series of sharp turns and painful spikes, like you're always rising or falling, like calm never lasted. But the truth is, most of life is ordinary. Most of your days were made of quiet, of brushing your teeth, walking to the store, watching a show, sitting in traffic, washing dishes, conversations that didn't change you, thoughts that didn't explode, sunsets you forgot to notice. And those days, they were real. They mattered. They were your life. But they don't feel like your life when you look back, because they're gone, not stored, not stitched into your identity the same way. And that creates a distortion. You start thinking your life is made only of chaos and miracles. But really, it was mostly made of Wednesday afternoons, of socks, of second cups of coffee, of nothing remarkable at all. That's the highlight reel bias, the lie of emotional memory, the illusion that your story is more jagged than it was, that you were either soaring or sinking, when really you were breathing, existing, becoming. And it affects how you live now. You chase highs to feel alive. You wait for the next big thing. You worry when life feels flat, as if something's wrong, as if you're behind, because your memory trained you to expect crescendos, not quiet, drama, not routine, certainty, not silence. But the richness of life is found in the moments that memory forgets. The mundane isn't empty. It's the soil where everything grows. Love is built in small glances, not grand declarations. Healing happens in daily choices, not dramatic breakthroughs. Identity forms in repetition, not reinvention. And joy is often subtle, found in the warmth of clean sheets, the laugh you didn't expect, the way your body feels after a long walk, the sunlight that hits the wall just right. These moments won't make your highlight reel, but they shape you. So what do you do with this bias? You start by remembering what memory forgets. You honor the ordinary. You keep a journal, not to record only the big things, but to rescue the small ones from disappearance. You tell yourself, just because I won't remember this doesn't mean it isn't real. You live not just for the moments your future self will recall, but for the ones that nourish you now. Because the truth is, your life isn't made of highlights. It's made of everything in between. And while memory may choose drama, your soul needs the mundane, the calm, the quiet repetitions, the slow becoming, the parts of life that never get posted, shared, or even spoken aloud. You are not just the sum of your extremes. You are the rhythm beneath them. And the ordinary is not your enemy. It's your home. Thought volume distortion. Imagine your mind as a crowded room. Some voices whisper, some speak gently, but one voice, the anxious one, shouts. It doesn't necessarily say the smartest thing or the truest, but it's loud, and because it's loud, it feels important, urgent, real. This is thought volume distortion, and it silently governs how you interpret reality. The louder a thought is, the more believable it seems. Not because of evidence, but because of volume. You're more likely to believe you'll fail, be abandoned, or make a mistake when those thoughts roar in your head, not because they're accurate, but because they overpower the quiet voice of reason that says you're safe, capable, enough. Anxiety hijacks attention. It's a survival mechanism. Your brain evolved to prioritize fear signals because they might protect you. But now, those alarms go off in harmless situations, and the calm, grounded voice, the one that remembers the truth, gets drowned out. It's not your fault, but it becomes your responsibility to retrain your attention. Let's say you're about to speak in public. One voice says, "You've practiced, you'll do fine." But the louder voice screams, "You'll mess up, everyone will laugh." You feel its energy in your chest, your breath. It becomes the dominant signal, even when it's wrong. This happens in relationships too. A calm thought says, "They're probably just busy." But the loud one insists, "They're ignoring me. I did something wrong." You respond not to the truth, but to the decibel level. So how do you fix it? First, don't try to silence the loud voice. That often makes it scream louder. Instead, acknowledge it. "I hear you. You're trying to protect me." Then shift your focus. Ask, "What's the quietest voice in the room saying right now?" Listen for the whisper beneath the panic, the thought that doesn't demand attention, but deserves it. Over time, volume loses its grip. You learn to anchor in calm, not chaos. You stop letting loudness equal truth, because sometimes the deepest wisdom doesn't shout, it waits. Let's explore what actually happens inside your mind when the loud thoughts win. Neurologically, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates rapidly when it detects a threat. But the rational parts of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex, respond more slowly. This delay gives anxious thoughts a head start. They're not smarter, just faster and louder, and because of this, they hijack perception. Now, meet Josh, a graphic designer. He gets praised constantly for his work. Clients return, friends compliment, even strangers admire his portfolio. But one time, just once, a manager tells him a layout feels off. That sentence becomes a siren in his brain. All the praise disappears beneath the noise of that single critique. He loses sleep, rechecks old work, wonders if he's an imposter. Why? Not because the critique was true, but because it was louder. This is the distortion. Loud thoughts echo, reverb, amplify. You replay them like a song stuck in your head. Meanwhile, the quieter truths, you're talented, respected, improving, fade. Not because they're gone, but because they don't demand your attention. And here's the cruel trick. The more attention you give a loud thought, the louder it gets. It's a feedback loop. You feed it with worry, and it grows. Soon, you can't hear anything else. Not your friends, not your gut, not your past successes. Just the blaring siren of "what if?" In childhood, many of us were trained to listen for danger, to anticipate disappointment, to overanalyze tone and gesture. If a parent's mood changed unpredictably, we learned to tune into anxiety, not calm. And that wiring stays. Even in adulthood, the calm voice can feel unfamiliar. The anxious one feels like home. So, how do we break the loop? Start with awareness. When a loud thought dominates, name it. Literally say, "This is an anxious thought." It's not a command, it's just loud. Then pause, ask, "What else is here?" Somewhere, a quieter voice exists. Maybe it's tiny, maybe it's buried, but it's always there. Write it down, speak it out loud, give it space. Some people call this inner reparenting. Others call it mindfulness. But really, it's reclaiming the inner stage, teaching your brain that volume doesn't equal value. And remember, The calm voice may never shout. That's okay. It doesn't need to. Truth doesn't panic. Truth doesn't rush. Let's take another example. Amira. She's in a relationship, but every time her partner forgets to text back quickly, the loud thought blasts, "He's losing interest. You're too much. It's happening again." The calm voice tries to reason. He's probably in a meeting. He's shown he cares. But she barely hears it, because that voice sounds like a whisper. It doesn't spike adrenaline. It doesn't match the old fear story she's used to. In therapy, she learns to pause before reacting, to breathe, to journal what each voice is saying. Over months, she begins to hear the quiet one more clearly. It's not louder, but she's trained herself to listen. That's the work. Not silencing anxiety, but adjusting the microphone. It's the same with social media. Outrage gets likes. Calm nuance gets ignored. We absorb this pattern. We learn that louder wins. And then, we apply that same distorted logic to ourselves. If this thought screams, it must be true. But that's performance, not reality. Your inner world doesn't need to trend. So next time you feel pulled into a spiral, try this. Close your eyes. Imagine a boardroom of thoughts. Anxiety is yelling. Guilt is pacing. But somewhere at the table, calm is raising its hand. Let it speak. Just once. That's all it takes to disrupt the volume bias. Thought volume distortion doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. You evolved to survive, not to be perfectly rational. But survival mode isn't meant to be permanent. Retrain your focus, not by force, but by curiosity. Ask, what voice have I been ignoring? What thought is true, even if it doesn't shout? Because sometimes, the wisest part of you doesn't raise its voice. It waits, and when you finally listen, everything changes. The reverse projection twist. You think you know who you are, but then someone says something, offhand, loaded, or cruel, and suddenly, doubt sets in. Am I really too sensitive? Too selfish? Too much? Too cold? You didn't think you were, until they said it. And the worst part? You believed it. Not because it felt true, but because they felt sure. This is the reverse projection twist. When someone else projects their beliefs, wounds, or fears onto you, and you absorb it as your own. It's not that you're projecting onto them, it's that you start becoming the reflection of their projection. You internalize what was never yours. You become what someone else needed you to be in their story, not who you actually are. And over time, their voice becomes the one you mistake for your own. Imagine a parent who always said, "You're lazy," whenever you tried to rest. Eventually, even when you're exhausted, you whisper to yourself, "I should be doing more." Or a partner who once said, "You're too dramatic," every time you cried. So now, when you feel emotions rising, you choke them down. Not because you don't feel them, but because you don't want to be that person. But that person was never real. It was a projection. Their fear, their discomfort, their inability to hold your truth. And yet, it became a mask you now wear. This is the twist. Because it's not overt control. It's identity erosion. Slow, subtle. It happens in silence, in second guessing, in the way you start editing yourself, until you no longer remember the original. And it's most common in people who care deeply, who want to be understood, who want peace. Because when someone projects onto you, you don't fight back. You try to make sense of it. You ask, "What did I do wrong?" Instead of asking, "What made them say that?" You take responsibility for emotions that weren't yours. And now, you carry a self-image built on someone else's shadow. This isn't just unfair, it's dangerous. Because the more projections you absorb, the more distorted your sense of self becomes. You start defending yourself against accusations that were never true. You start avoiding behaviors that never harmed anyone. You shrink to fit someone else's comfort zone. And all of this happens quietly. Take Rhea. She's thoughtful, expressive, emotionally attuned. But her family called her too much growing up. Too intense. Too emotional. Now, as an adult, she minimizes her joy, downplays her passions, because a part of her still believes she needs to be smaller to be accepted. Or Jordan. He was labeled selfish by a partner who wanted control. He gave everything, bent backwards, lost his voice trying to prove he wasn't. Now, even when someone thanks him, he feels guilty, like he hasn't done enough. That label stuck, even though it was never his to begin with. This is the tragedy of the reverse projection twist. You start living in someone else's definition of who you are. But here's the truth. What people say about you often says more about them. Their discomfort with your boundaries does not mean you're cold. Their reaction to your sadness does not make you too dramatic. Their need to control does not mean you're selfish. And their fear of your authenticity does not mean you're wrong for being real. You are not required to carry someone else's emotional homework. So how do you reclaim yourself? You start by noticing the mismatch. When a label feels heavy, ask, do I believe this because it's true, or because someone once said it with conviction? When you criticize yourself, ask, whose voice am I hearing? When you feel guilt for being yourself, ask, who told me that version of me wasn't lovable? These questions don't fix everything, but they cut through the fog. They remind you your identity is not a mirror, it's a flame. It doesn't depend on how others reflect you, it burns from within. And if someone projects their storm onto you, you don't have to become the thunder. You can be the stillness underneath. You can say, that's yours, not mine. You can return their story with compassion, but without acceptance. And most of all, you can remember the parts of you that existed before they named you wrong, because you were never too much, never not enough. You were simply misunderstood by someone who hadn't met themselves yet. And now, it's your turn to unlearn their version of you and come home to your own. The shape assumption reflex. You don't see what's there, you see what you expect to be there. That's the shape assumption reflex. Your brain doesn't wait for all the data. It guesses, it fills in gaps, it completes shapes based on what it's seen before. Before your conscious mind even registers the image, your brain has already drawn the outline and declared it known. That shadow in the corner, your brain completes it into a person. That half-read sentence, your mind finishes it the way your memory predicts. That barely heard voice, you insert the tone you expected, not necessarily the one that was used. Perception isn't objective, it's predictive, and it's fast, blindingly fast. The brain uses something called top-down processing, where prior knowledge and expectations shape the interpretation of incoming data. You think you're reacting to the present, but you're really updating the past in real time. It's how you can recognize a face in a crowd with just a glance. It's why you can read messy handwriting. It's why a song sounds familiar even if you've never heard it. But there's a dark side to this reflex. Because your brain doesn't just complete neutral shapes. It completes people. It completes motives. It completes threats. Someone looks away mid-conversation, and your brain finishes the story. They're bored. They don't like me. I've said something wrong. But maybe they just got distracted. Maybe they were processing. Maybe it had nothing to do with you. You see a message with no emoji, and your brain adds a tone. You don't just hear what was said, you hear it through the lens of old wounds, old expectations, old fears. Your brain shortcuts the present with assumptions from the past. And once a shape is assumed, it's hard to unsee. That's why misunderstandings are so sticky. That's why certain people always feel difficult or unsafe, because your brain already decided what shape they were and everything they do just colors in the outline. Even if they've changed, even if you were wrong, you're not reacting to them. You're reacting to a template. And it's not just social. You see your future this way too. You assume the same disappointment, the same rejection, the same pattern, because your brain has drawn it before. And drawing something new takes more effort than repeating what's familiar. But here's the truth. Most of what you see is imagined, not hallucinated, but interpreted, guessed, inferred. And the reflex isn't evil. It's efficient. It saves you time. It helps you survive. But survival is not the same as living. Living means slowing down enough to notice when the shape your brain drew doesn't match what's in front of you. It means letting people surprise you. It means rereading the message without the filter of fear. It means asking instead of assuming. It means letting the moment redraw itself. And that's not easy. It feels like standing in uncertainty. It feels like waiting longer for truth when the lie is already comfortable. But it's how you escape the loop. Because if every conversation, every dream, every moment is just you reacting to a shape you never questioned, you're not alive. You're just echoing old stories in new places. And you deserve more than that. You deserve to see clearly, to hear fully, to know deeply, not just react instantly. The brain may finish early, but you can wait. You can look again. And this time, you can see. See the incomplete line and don't finish it. Hear the silence and don't fill it. Let the sentence end awkwardly. Let the face remain unread. Let the discomfort sit. This is how you reclaim perception. Because clarity doesn't come from speed, it comes from space. And when you give your mind space, something beautiful happens. You stop reacting like a reflex. You start responding like a soul. And the moment stops being a pattern. It becomes real. You become real. Not the projection, not the prediction, but you, alive in what's actually happening. And that's freedom from the loop. That's vision without assumption. That's truth. Not the one you expected, but the one that was waiting just behind the shape. You'll be tempted to rush back, to let the brain finish your sentences, your judgments, your fears, because that feels safe, predictable, efficient. But efficiency kills intimacy. It erases nuance. It deletes softness. It crushes wonder. So breathe. Breathe when your mind screams for closure. Breathe when the assumption feels easier than the question. Breathe when the story forms too fast. And look again. Let people surprise you. Let yourself be wrong. Let the outline blur. In that blur, the old shapes collapse and new ones emerge. Ones drawn not from fear, but presence. Not from memory, but truth. Not from habit, but curiosity. You've spent a lifetime reacting to assumptions. Now comes the art of perception. Real seeing, slow seeing. The kind that asks, what if I don't know yet? And lives in that question long enough for reality to unfold, not as you expected it, but as it truly is. That's where understanding lives, not in what you think you saw, but in what you were brave enough to wait and truly witness. The emotion reversal illusion. Imagine laughing in a room full of people, but deep inside, you feel like you're betraying someone. You feel guilty for feeling good. Or you cry at a funeral and realize the tears aren't from sorrow, they're from release, even relief. This is the emotion reversal illusion. When your feelings don't tell the truth, they tell a story wrapped in instinct, memory, and unconscious coding. We like to believe emotions are honest, raw, unfiltered signals from our inner self. But often, they're masks layered over each other. What you think is happiness may be relief from fear. What you label as anger might be buried grief. What appears as calm might be learned dissociation. Emotions are not always emotions in their purest form. They're performance, protection, and programming. Happiness, especially, is suspect. For people raised in chaos, happiness doesn't feel safe. It feels like a setup. A moment of joy triggers a quiet dread. You wait for the fall, for the punishment. The smile you wear becomes armor against guilt, and the laugh becomes a distraction from the fear that joy will cost you something. And grief is complex. We cry not just from loss, but from exhaustion. Sometimes, grief is permission to stop pretending. When someone passes away after long suffering, the tears can carry relief. Not because you wanted them gone, but because the weight of watching pain finally lifted. And then, guilt follows. Why do I feel lighter? You mistake your nervous system's exhale for emotional betrayal. This is not a failure of empathy. It's a survival mechanism. The nervous system encodes survival, not social narratives. If your brain associates joy with danger, It will flood your body with cortisol when you're happy. If safety is found in silence, you'll feel anxious when speaking up, even in healing spaces. Your feelings can lie, not maliciously, but biologically. Your brain is trying to protect you using outdated scripts written in past wounds. This is especially common in trauma survivors. A child praised only for being quiet learns to fear their own voice. A person who was punished for expressing needs learns to smile while starving. They walk through life displaying peace while experiencing internal panic. They feel happy at rejection because it confirms their belief. I don't deserve connection. That's not joy. It's familiarity, misread as comfort. Social conditioning deepens this illusion. We're taught that some emotions are bad, some are good. That smiling means you're okay. That crying means you're weak or honest. That anger is immature and happiness is proof of a good life. So we edit, we perform, we display the emotion that earns approval and hide the one that feels too raw, too messy, too shameful. This leads to emotional dyslexia. You misread your own signals. You start to believe your surface feelings. You think you're fine because you're smiling. You think you're over it because you stopped crying. You think you're peaceful because you no longer react. But really, you've just gone numb. And numbness, too, wears masks. It can look like strength. It can look like wisdom. But it might just be emotional paralysis in disguise. Even therapists and healers fall into this illusion. A breakthrough moment might flood a client with laughter, but underneath is pain breaking free. Or someone may weep uncontrollably, not from sadness, but because they've never been allowed to feel safe. The body releases what words cannot decode. How do you break this illusion? By learning to question what the emotion is underneath the emotion. Ask, if I couldn't label this feeling, what does it feel like in my body? Is that joy, or is it the release of pressure? Is that anger, or the desperation to be seen? Is that sadness, or just the silence after masking everything for too long? You begin by slowing down the labeling reflex. Let the emotion breathe before you assign it meaning. Notice where it lives, in your chest, your gut, your skin. Emotions don't lie, but their stories do. They're not false, they're layered. They are echoes. And if you trace the echo back far enough, you find the original voice, a younger version of you still whispering. That whisper might say, "This joy scares me because last time I felt it, something bad followed." Or, "This calm is not peace, it's shutdown." Once you hear that voice, you don't have to obey it, but you can finally understand it. This is emotional fluency, not just naming what you feel, but questioning what those names hide. Knowing that emotions often come dressed in costumes borrowed from past versions of yourself. So when you feel something that doesn't seem to fit, don't dismiss it. Ask it what it's protecting. Ask it whose memory it's carrying. And most of all, ask if it's the whole truth or just the loudest one in the room. Because inside the illusion of emotion is your chance to see clearer than ever before, not through the labels, but through the lived truth underneath them. Urgency bias activation. You feel it when the pressure spikes, when time feels like it's collapsing and your chest tightens with the weight of needing to act now. Your heart races, your focus narrows, and suddenly the world divides into only two categories: safe or dangerous, yes or no, right or wrong. The middle ground disappears. Nuance vanishes, and your brain, once capable of complex thought, begins screaming for certainty. This is urgency bias activation. In high-stress states, your mind shifts into survival mode, and survival doesn't want a slow, thoughtful process. It wants fast conclusions. It wants a plan, a direction, an answer, even if that answer is wrong, because uncertainty, in that moment, feels more dangerous than error. Your body isn't malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what evolution taught it. When faced with a threat, real or perceived, your nervous system diverts resources away from higher reasoning and toward reaction. Fight, flight, freeze. This works if you're running from a predator, but if the threat is emotional, social, or internal, the urgency becomes a distortion. Panic rewrites clarity into absolutes. You lose the ability to hold opposing truths. You can't consider context. You stop asking questions. The brain doesn't want complexity. It wants control. So it invents a story. This is bad. They're against me. I have to fix this now or it's all over. And the deeper you fall into that urgency, the more real those thoughts feel. This is the bias, the belief that quick action is the same as right action. It shows up everywhere. In arguments where you say things you don't mean because silence feels unbearable. In relationships where you push for answers before emotions have had time to settle. In decisions where you leap, not out of wisdom, but out of the terror of waiting. You think you're being decisive, but often you're just trying to escape discomfort. There's a neurological reason for this. Under acute stress, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, empathy, and impulse control, dampens. Meanwhile, the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, lights up. It doesn't care about nuance. It cares about escape. The longer you sit in uncertainty, the louder it yells. And in this state, things that would normally feel like questions become threats. Feedback feels like attack. Reflection feels like paralysis. Delay feels like doom. You start believing the first thought that arrives, the first feeling that spikes. You become sure of your certainty, not because it's true, but because your system can't tolerate ambiguity. This is why high-pressure environments often create bad decisions, not because people are stupid, but because their minds have been hijacked by urgency. It's also why cults, toxic bosses, and manipulative partners use pressure tactics, because urgency shrinks awareness. It makes you forget options. It creates the illusion that there's only one way forward. So what's the way out? It begins with recognizing the lie that urgency tells. If you don't act now, everything will collapse. That may be true in a burning building, but in most emotional situations, it's not. The truth is, clarity takes time. Wisdom needs breath, and good decisions often wait just beyond the first wave of panic. You have to slow down when your body is screaming to speed up. Pause, breathe, name the urgency for what it is, not clarity, but desperation, not truth, but survival instinct. Ask yourself, is this urgent or just uncomfortable? Is there really no time, or does it just feel like that because I'm scared? Retrain your nervous system to associate stillness with safety. Practice responding, not reacting. Create space between trigger and choice. Because every moment you delay the panic response, you reclaim power from the urgency bias. It doesn't mean never acting fast. It means knowing when fast is wise, and when it's just fear disguised as decisiveness. And over time, you'll start to feel it. The difference between urgency and truth, the gap between pressure and purpose. You'll start to recognize that not every fire needs your hands, not every demand is your emergency, because urgency is loud, but wisdom is quiet. And to hear it, you must slow down. The familiar fear loop. You say you want peace. You say you're tired of the anxiety, the stress, the tightness in your chest that follows you from room to room. But when peace finally shows up, quiet, soft, unfamiliar, you flinch. You sabotage, you scroll, you pick a fight, not because you love pain, but because pain feels like home. This is the familiar fear loop. The brain craves patterns. It doesn't care if they're healthy. It cares if they're predictable. Familiarity feels safe, even if it's hurting you. If you grew up around chaos, silence now feels suspicious. If love once came with punishment, healthy love now feels fake. Your nervous system is tuned like an old radio, and fear is the frequency you've always known. Imagine this. A child lives in a house where anger is normal. Raised voices, slammed doors, emotional withdrawal. That's what love looked like. That child grows up and meets someone kind, patient, consistent. But something feels off. Not because kindness is wrong, but because it's new. The brain says, this doesn't match the blueprint. So it searches for cracks, it tests, it pulls away. That's not resistance, it's a trauma echo. Familiar pain feels manageable. You know how to brace for it, you know how to navigate it. But peace? It requires surrender, vulnerability. You can't brace for it, you have to trust it. And trust is terrifying when your past taught you that calm always breaks. This is why you may stay in toxic jobs, cling to one-sided friendships, or chase partners who activate your wounds. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because suffering feels stable. Comfort becomes a risk. The familiar fear loop whispers, don't let your guard down. Something bad always follows peace. And so you reject peace before it can reject you. But here's the truth. Peace isn't a trick. It's not the setup before the fall. It's the life you never knew you were allowed to have. And your discomfort with it is not proof it's wrong. It's proof you've outgrown your old story. To break the loop, start with noticing. When something good happens and you want to ruin it, pause. When you feel calm and you get restless, pause. Ask, am I unsafe or just unfamiliar? Let your body learn that peace isn't a threat. Let repetition rewire safety. You're allowed to outgrow fear. You're allowed to make peace your new home. It won't feel natural at first, but over time, what once felt unfamiliar becomes you. Let's go deeper. The familiar fear loop is not just a psychological glitch, it's a survival strategy that got outdated. Your nervous system doesn't work on logic, it works on exposure. Whatever you've experienced most becomes your emotional baseline, and if fear was your emotional wallpaper, peace feels like standing in an empty room with nothing to defend against. It makes you fidget. You mistake quiet for danger. Meet Clara. She left an emotionally abusive relationship after years of gaslighting and blame. Her new partner is kind, communicates openly, doesn't raise his voice, and yet, she can't relax. When he's kind, she waits for the other shoe to drop. When he says, take your time, she hears, I'm losing interest. She over-explains, over-apologizes, over-analyzes, until she burns out and pushes him away. Her body isn't craving love. It's craving the fear she's used to surviving. This is the pain paradox. Your brain seeks the familiar over the healthy, because what's familiar feels survivable. That's why people sabotage new opportunities. Not because they hate success, but because failure is a script they know how to read. You stay in the job you hate because the idea of switching careers floods you with uncertainty. You ghost the friend who respects your boundaries because you're afraid they'll abandon you first. You overwork not because you love achievement, but because rest feels unsafe. This loop is invisible. It doesn't scream, it simmers. Sometimes it sounds like, I'm not used to this. Other times, this feels too easy. Or, what if this is just temporary? It masquerades as realism, but often it's a fear of healing. Because healing demands you rewrite your core beliefs, that you were never too much, that you do deserve love without conditions, that calm isn't a countdown to chaos, that safety isn't an illusion. But rewriting means grieving. You grieve the years spent mistrusting calm, the relationships you settled for, the love you never thought you deserved. And grief, true grief, is quieter than fear. It doesn't shout. It sits beside you like an old friend and says, we made it. Now, let's begin again. So how do you escape the loop? You don't escape. You walk through it slowly. You notice the urge to pick a fight when things are calm, and you breathe instead. You resist the pull to sabotage when someone shows up consistently, and you let them. You let peace feel awkward at first, like new shoes. You wear it anyway. The familiar fear loop isn't a flaw. It's proof you adapted. But now, you're evolving. Let peace be the new pattern. Let trust be the new sound. Let calm be the loudest thing in the room. And when the fear voice whispers again, this is too good to be true, whisper back, no, this is just new. That's how healing speaks, not in volume, but in repetition. and you're allowed to repeat piece until it's the only thing that feels like home. Story pattern compulsion. You need it to make sense. Not just the big things, life, love, loss, but the little ones too. The canceled meeting, the offhand comment, the stranger who stared too long, the phone call you never got back. You string them together. You try to find the meaning because chaos is unbearable and story feels like survival. This is the story pattern compulsion, a deep psychological need to impose narrative onto randomness, to turn scattered events into structure, to give accidents a purpose, to dress coincidences in meaning, to pretend that fate is a hand placing pieces, not a storm scattering them. It's not madness, it's a coping mechanism. Your brain evolved to find patterns in sound, in light, in behavior, because the ability to predict meant the ability to survive. So when life spins into disorder, your mind doesn't just search, it creates. You build a beginning, middle, and end. You invent arcs. You assign roles, the villain, the mentor, the tragic mistake, the turning point. You look back at a year of heartbreak and think, maybe that was the setup for my redemption arc. You get rejected and whisper, maybe this is just the first act of something bigger. And sometimes that's healing. Sometimes the story you tell yourself is the only thing holding you together. But sometimes it traps you, because not all things that happen are part of a plot. Sometimes the meeting was canceled because someone overslept. Sometimes you got ghosted because they were too scared to be honest. Sometimes bad things happen, not because the universe is preparing you, but because life is indifferent and random, and not every wound has a wisdom attached to it. But you can't accept that, because story feels safer than meaninglessness. So you keep building it, even when it hurts. You turn a breakup into an origin myth. You turn failure into foreshadowing. You turn coincidence into destiny. And now, you're not just surviving reality, you're editing it to fit a shape. But that shape has limits. Because if you decide this is the dark night of the soul, you might force yourself to suffer longer than necessary, just to fulfill the emotional rhythm. If you decide this person was meant to teach me a lesson, you might excuse harm that deserved boundaries, not meaning. If you decide this pain must lead to a breakthrough, you might miss the simpler truth, that it just hurt. You become trapped in a performance, a version of yourself narrating instead of living. Take Erin. After losing her job, she told everyone, "This is the universe redirecting me." She believed it, needed to believe it. But a year later, she hadn't pursued her dreams. She was still waiting for the right timing to complete the arc. The story she clung to became the reason she didn't move. Or Sam, who saw every relationship as a lesson. Every heartbreak had a quote, a metaphor, a meaning. But he never paused to actually grieve. He kept turning pain into plot, because that felt safer than admitting how lonely he was. This is the downside of the story pattern compulsion. You miss the rawness underneath. You miss reality. And reality is where healing lives, because not everything has to be a symbol. Not every loss is a setup. Not every coincidence is a clue. Sometimes the story is this: I didn't know what to do, so I made something up to survive. And that's okay. You needed that scaffolding, that plot line, that comfort. It got you through. But now, you can drop the script. You can let things be messy, unstructured, unfinished. You can let a moment just be a moment without forcing it into meaning. And ironically, that's when real meaning shows up. Not as a perfect story, but as presence, truth, wholeness without a plot. So the next time your mind starts narrating a coincidence as a sign or a failure as foreshadowing, pause. Ask, am I finding meaning or forcing it? Ask, what if this is just what it is? Ask, can I sit with not knowing the ending? Because life isn't a novel. It's not clean. It doesn't always give us poetic structure. And yet, it's beautiful. Not because of the story we tell about it, but because we dared to live it without one. The meaning leak effect. A number keeps appearing. A song plays twice in one day. You think of someone, and they message you. Coincidence? Maybe. But it doesn't feel that way. That's the meaning leak effect. Your brain is a meaning-making machine. It can't tolerate randomness, not for long. So when reality leaves gaps, your mind fills them with patterns. And those patterns feel personal. They feel sacred. They feel like someone, or something, is speaking through the noise. You're not broken for feeling this. You're wired for it. Evolution gave humans a bias toward pattern recognition because it helped our ancestors survive. Seeing a predator that wasn't there was safer than missing one that was. Better to see meaning in shadows than perish in randomness. But now, you live in a world of infinite inputs: news, numbers, names, colors, glances, texts, traffic lights. Every second, your senses drink in fragments, and your brain tries to stitch them into a story. That's when meaning leaks. Not because the universe is talking, but because you can't bear silence from it. It starts subtly. You see your birth date on a receipt. You hear a word you just thought. You dream something small, and then it happens. You whisper, "This must mean something." And maybe it does, but not in the way you think. The meaning isn't proof of fate, it's proof of hunger. The hunger to believe your life is part of something vast and intelligent. That you're not floating in chaos. That the gears are turning for you, even when you can't see the clock. But this hunger can become a trap. It makes you chase signs, even when none were sent. You replay conversations looking for hidden codes. You assign weight to harmless events. You become a collector of strange synchronicities, building altars out of accidents. Because if the universe is talking, then maybe you're special. Maybe you're seen. Maybe you're not alone. But what if the universe isn't speaking? What if it's just listening, and you're the one echoing back your longing? What if the patterns you find aren't messages, but mirrors? And every sign you decode is just you trying to be heard. This is the terrifying beauty of being human. You project meaning because you crave belonging in a vast, cold cosmos. And sometimes that craving leads to truth, but often it leads to illusion. Beautiful, comforting illusion. You believe the universe nudged you toward that job, that person, that moment. You feel chosen. You feel guided. And maybe you were. Or maybe you connected the dots because your heart needed them to connect. There's no shame in this. It's not weakness. It's not delusion. It's the emotional intelligence of the soul, trying to turn chaos into choreography. But the danger is when you forget who did the drawing, when you give the credit, or the blame, to the stars, the signs you swore were sent. You stop making decisions. You wait for instructions that may never come. And all the while, your life pauses, waiting for the next divine pattern to give you permission to move. But you don't need permission to live. You don't need a cosmic green light to matter. You are the pattern maker. You are the voice leaking meaning into silence. And maybe, just maybe, that's what divinity actually is. Because when the world goes quiet, your soul speaks louder. When randomness surrounds you, your imagination turns it into rhythm. And that rhythm, over time, becomes your music. You are not a passive listener. You are the composer. So yes, the number repeats. Yes, the song comes on again. Yes, the dream happens twice. But maybe it's not the universe pulling the strings. Maybe it's you, your hopes, your grief, your memories, arranging the stars to mirror your ache for purpose. It's not less magical because you made it. It's more. Because now, you're not waiting for signs. You're writing them. You're making meaning, not leaking it. You're not a prisoner of pattern recognition. You're a poet of perception. And in that power there is something sacred. Not because the universe whispered it to you, but because you whispered back, and it answered with your own voice. The meaning is real, even if the message came from inside, because that's still connection. And maybe that's the point. Maybe your echo in the silence is what makes the silence holy. You've spent years chasing signs, but maybe now it's time to become one. Let your actions be the alignment. Let your love be the coincidence. Let your courage be the message. You are not a receiver of patterns. You are their source. And that realization, that's the meaning that was waiting for you all along. Not from numbers, not from dreams, but from the quiet truth that you are allowed to live, even without a sign. And sometimes, the deepest meaning arrives only when you stop demanding it, when you let silence be silence, and still choose to move forward anyway. That's when the meaning finds you, not as a leak, but as a flood. Attention, fragmentation. Illusion. You think you're multitasking. You're replying to a message while half listening to someone speak, checking a notification while watching a video, switching tabs while trying to write something meaningful. You feel productive, present even, but you're not. You're existing in a rapid strobe of micro moments, your attention blinking in and out like faulty signal lights. This is the attention fragmentation illusion. Your brain can't truly multitask. What it does is switch, rapidly and repeatedly, between tasks. Each switch comes with a cognitive cost. You lose milliseconds here, seconds there. It feels instant, but the mental residue builds up. Psychologists call this attention residue, the lingering friction of the previous task that contaminates the clarity of the next. The more you switch, the more your brain accumulates fragments, unprocessed bits, half-finished thoughts, emotional leftovers. It's like trying to read a book while running. You may glance at the words, but you'll never absorb the meaning. And when you repeat this for hours, days, years, it becomes a lifestyle of permanent distraction. You don't notice it at first, but soon, focus feels foreign. Silence becomes unbearable. Deep work becomes impossible, because your brain, once trained for stillness, has become rewired for flickers. We see this everywhere. In classrooms, where children bounce between apps, never fully absorbing. In workplaces, where productivity tools multiply, yet burnout rises. In relationships where people are physically together but mentally elsewhere, mid-conversation, mid-swipe, mid-thought. Even rest isn't spared. You open a meditation app, then switch to a podcast. You start journaling, but your mind drifts to an email. You try to nap, but your thoughts scroll like a feed. Your nervous system becomes conditioned for jump cuts, not narrative. This illusion isn't harmless. Over time, it affects your memory, your emotional regulation, even your sense of identity. When your attention is fractured, your story becomes fragmented too. You begin to forget what mattered, not because you're careless, but because your attention was never allowed to fully land. And this creates a deeper illusion, the illusion of time starvation. You feel like there's never enough time, but often, it's not time you're missing, it's focus. One fully present hour can restore more clarity than 10 distracted ones, but presence is now a skill, not a default. It must be relearned. And relearning starts small. By noticing the flicker, that twitch of your hand toward your phone mid-thought, that itch in your mind to check something during silence, that urge to split your attention even when there's nothing demanding it. You don't need to control it, just witness it. Because awareness is the first rupture in the illusion. From there, build rituals that restore attention. Protect 1 hour a day. No tabs, no pings, no swipes. Just one thing. Read a page slowly. Listen to someone without planning your reply. Stare at a tree without photographing it. These aren't luxuries. They're medicine for a brain starved of narrative coherence. You are not a machine. You're not meant to boot new programs every 30 seconds. You're meant to sink into meaning. And meaning requires stillness. The real tragedy isn't that we've lost attention. It's that we've forgotten what it feels like to have it. But you can find your way back, not by doing more, but by doing less, fully. Not by adding, but by subtracting distraction. And not by force, but by remembering that attention is how you reclaim your life, one whole moment at a time. Think about this. When was the last time you truly finished a thought? Not half-thought, not paused, and resumed later. but a single, uninterrupted mental journey from start to insight. If it feels rare, that's not your fault. It's by design. Every app, every notification, every platform is optimized to interrupt you. Not once, but continuously. Not loudly, but subtly. Just enough to break the chain of your attention before it becomes deep. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Studies show that constant task switching decreases the density of gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain responsible for focus, empathy, and emotional regulation. In essence, your attention fragmentation isn't just making you distracted, it's reshaping your brain to stay that way. And it affects your relationships too. Conversations become transactional. Listening becomes performative. You nod, you smile, but you're not there. You're 2 tabs away, a swipe behind. You might hear someone's words, but you miss the emotion under them. And slowly, that becomes normal. Disconnection wrapped in surface interaction. But the most painful cost? You lose your inner narrator. The quiet voice that helps you understand who you are, what you value, what you're becoming. Because identity isn't formed in distraction. It's formed in stillness, in the pauses between inputs, in the unfiltered, uninterrupted moments where your thoughts echo long enough to leave a mark. When you lose those pauses, you lose access to yourself, and then you wonder why you feel lost. So how do you reclaim it? First, recognize that attention isn't just focus, it's love. What you give your attention to, you give your life to. Start guarding it like something sacred. Begin with micro practices. No phone meals, single task walks, 1 page of reading with full immersion. It's not about duration, it's about depth. Then, build boundaries. Set do not disturb hours. Create deep zones where nothing competes for your mind. Let people know that presence is your priority. Even if they don't understand, it will change how they treat you. Finally, be patient. Rebuilding attention is like healing a strained muscle. It aches at first. Your mind will resist. It will itch for a dopamine hit. But if you stay, even when it's uncomfortable, you'll feel it. Your focus returning, your thoughts aligning, your presence sharpening into something rare. You'll start to live your life in full sentences again. And that, more than any productivity hack, is the power of escaping the illusion. Because the real you, the one buried under interruptions, they're still in there, waiting to finish a thought, waiting to be whole again. The insight addiction bias. You know the feeling. That rush of clarity. That moment when everything suddenly makes sense, when confusion collapses into insight. It feels like truth. It feels like revelation. It feels like waking up from a dream and finally seeing the shape of reality. Your body softens. Your breath deepens. And for the first time in hours or days or years, you know. But what if that knowing is wrong? What if that aha moment isn't the arrival of truth, but just the brain's way of self-soothing? What if insight is addictive? This is the insight addiction bias. We are wired to crave understanding, to seek patterns, to reach conclusions. Because in a chaotic world, comprehension feels like control. And the moment we land on an answer that fits, even if it's a lie, the brain rewards us. It floods us with relief, with emotional closure, with the sensation of completion. That's why the insight doesn't even have to be correct. It just has to feel true enough to stop the ache of uncertainty. You think you've figured out why the relationship failed, why you can't trust people, why your boss avoids eye contact, why the dream felt like a message. You tell yourself, of course, that's what it was, and the story locks into place. The pain quiets. The questions fade. And what's left isn't truth, it's peace. Temporary, but intoxicating. That's the trap. You start seeking that hit of clarity over and over, like a mental drug. You scroll for quotes that explain your life in a sentence. You chase podcasts, therapists, conversations, journals, trying to find the insight, the one that will finally make you feel whole. And sometimes you find something real, but sometimes you find something emotionally convenient, something that sounds profound but simplifies too much. That tells you the problem wasn't your parents, or your patterns, or your past, but just one realization away from dissolving. You begin to mistake insight for healing, but they're not the same. Healing takes time. It's slow, messy. It often gets worse before it gets better. But insight? Insight is instant. It feels like progress, like evolution. It gives you the illusion of movement, even when nothing has changed. And because the emotional payoff is so strong, your brain starts collecting insights like souvenirs. You remember the moment you realized you fear abandonment, the moment you saw the narcissist behind the mask, the moment you labeled your trauma. Each insight feels like growth. But real growth? Real transformation? It doesn't come with fanfare. It's quiet. It happens in repetition, in resisting the same reaction one more time, in setting the same boundary again, in letting go of stories that once felt sacred. The insight can start the journey, but it's not the journey itself. And sometimes the insight is wrong, or incomplete, or weaponized. You might decide, I was always the problem, or they never loved me, or I'll never change. And it feels like truth, not because it is, but because it ends the questioning, the doubt, the searching. That's the beautiful lie. Insight addiction tricks you into believing that clarity equals truth, that explanation equals freedom. But you can explain your pain 100 different ways and still live in it. You can have all the insights in the world and still sabotage love, still avoid intimacy, still hurt yourself in ways that don't make sense. Because the goal isn't to have insights, the goal is to live differently. So how do you break the bias? You start by noticing when the insight makes you feel high, when it offers a satisfying conclusion that demands no further action. You pause and ask, is this helping me grow, or just helping me feel better? You hold your insights loosely, let them breathe, test them over time. You allow new ones to contradict old ones. You admit that even your most profound realizations might be partial truths, emotional bridges, not destinations. And most importantly, you learn to live with the mystery, with the parts of you that aren't fully explained, with the questions that don't close cleanly, with the stories that keep evolving, because your healing isn't a theory. It's a practice, a pattern you build, not a phrase you memorize. Insight can be the spark, but it's the fire you build after, the way you live differently when no one's watching, that tells the real story. The safe choice. Mirage. You think you're playing it safe. You think staying in your comfort zone means avoiding risk, avoiding pain, avoiding failure. But what if your so-called safe choice isn't safe at all? What if it's just familiar? Familiar discomfort, familiar stress, familiar self-doubt. This is the safe choice mirage, a powerful illusion, one that makes stagnation look like safety. The human brain is wired to favor predictability. It's not looking for happiness. It's looking for stability. If you've lived with tension long enough, your nervous system memorizes it. It becomes the baseline. And anything outside of that, even peace, even joy, registers as a threat. That's why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that shrink them, cities that suffocate. They say, at least I know what to expect. That's the brain talking, not the soul. Think of Maya. She's been at the same job for 8 years. It drains her. She dreads Mondays. She fantasizes about quitting. But she doesn't. Why? Because the unknown is terrifying. She doesn't know what's next. But she does know what misery feels like. And misery, at least, is familiar. We do this in love too. We choose partners who remind us of our past, not because they're good for us, but because we know how to survive them. We know the patterns, the rhythms, even the arguments. It becomes choreography, predictable, deadening. The safe choice mirage whispers, don't rock the boat. Better the devil you know. Comfort is survival. But comfort isn't always truth. Sometimes it's just inertia. True safety isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of alignment, of values, of growth, of peace that doesn't cost you your health. So how do you step out? First, name the lie. That comfort equals safety. Then start asking new questions. What's actually nourishing me? What am I tolerating just because it's familiar? The answers will shake you, and then free you, because the safe choice that costs your joy is just a slow-motion betrayal. And the real danger is staying exactly where you are. Let's dig deeper. The illusion of safety is powerful because your nervous system is trained by repetition, not truth. When you've experienced repeated discomfort, your body calibrates around it. You may even mistake the spike in cortisol for a sign you're alive. So when something calm enters your life, an opportunity, a change, a possibility, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like danger. The safe choice. Mirage doesn't just keep you stuck, it gaslights your instincts. Consider Aaron. He has an idea for a business. People tell him he's brilliant. He knows the market. He has the skills, but he never starts. Instead, he updates his resume again, sends out job applications he doesn't care about, because deep down, failure on his own terms feels too risky. He'd rather fail in a familiar system than succeed on an unfamiliar path. Why? Because his brain associates structure with survival. Even if that structure is a cage, the Mirage plays tricks in friendships too. You keep the friend who never asks how you are, the one who constantly drains your energy. Why? Because they've been there for years. You don't question if they add value. You just accept their presence as a constant, but a constant isn't always a comfort. Sometimes it's a weight. And here's the brutal truth. Your brain would rather return to a predictable wound than risk a healing that feels unfamiliar. Because healing requires surrender. Change requires grief. You have to let go of the known discomfort, and that's terrifying. We're not taught to recognize internal stagnation. We're taught to fear external change. So you stay. You stay in the role you've outgrown. You stay in the house that echoes with someone else's dream. You stay in the identity you wore like armor for too long, and the world rewards it. People say, "You're so responsible, so stable," but they don't see the decay behind your eyes. The nights you lie awake wondering if this is all there is. The quiet grief of unlived potential. But the body knows. It knows when you've traded aliveness for routine, when the fire inside you has dimmed, when the joy is gone, and only numbness remains. So here's the pivot. Ask yourself, am I safe or just familiar? Am I thriving or just surviving? Is this comfort or quiet desperation? You might not be ready to leap, but you can question. You can notice the pattern. You can feel the ache that comes from lying to yourself, and you can choose, slowly, gently, to build a new version of safety. One based not on repetition, but on resonance. Because there's a life beyond the mirage, a life where peace isn't earned through suffering, where you don't have to prove your worth through burnout, where safety means being known, not just being tolerated. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. The unknown may be terrifying, but staying trapped in a familiar hell, that's not safety. That's slow erosion, and you were made for more. Identity drift syndrome. You don't notice it at first. How your laugh shifts slightly around them. How your opinions soften, harden, or vanish altogether depending on who's speaking. How you dress differently with one group than you do with another. How you shrink, or expand, or mirror, subtly, until what was once you becomes blur. This is identity drift syndrome, the quiet erosion of your core self, shaped not by choice but by proximity. You become who you're with, or, more precisely, your identity becomes a composite of the people around you, their values, their energy, their tone, and the longer you stay in their orbit, the more your shape shifts, not out of manipulation, but out of survival. Because from the moment we're born, we learn. Connection requires adaptation, so we mold ourselves to be loved, to belong, to stay safe, and eventually, we forget where the molding ends, and we begin. You say you love that show, but do you? Or did the people you admire talk about it until it became part of your personality? You say you believe in certain values, but when you're with others who think differently, you stay silent. Not to lie, but because you're no longer sure what you believe when you're alone. And maybe you were the funny one with one group, the deep one with another, the helper in one relationship, the mystery in another. And somewhere along the way, the fragments stopped reassembling when the people left. This is the cost of constant mirroring. You become emotionally multilingual, but spiritually homeless. It's not weakness. It's what your nervous system learned to do. If you grew up in an unpredictable household, you likely became a shapeshifter early on, sensing moods, adapting fast, becoming whatever made others less dangerous, more pleased. And now, as an adult, you blend by instinct, until blending becomes erasure. Take Noah. He's confident around certain friends, loud, charismatic, sure of himself. But when he visits family, he reverts. Quiet, cautious, agreeable. Afterwards, he always feels like he's leaving himself behind, but he can't stop it. It's automatic. Or take Lana. She dates people who are dominant, decisive. She adopts their interests, their language, their goals. But when the relationship ends, she stands in her apartment surrounded by items she no longer recognizes, books she never wanted to read, clothes she never liked, dreams that weren't hers. This is identity drift. You don't lose yourself all at once. You give yourself away in teaspoons until you look in the mirror and can't remember if the person looking back is truly you or just a collection of echoes. So how do you find your way back? First, you pause the performance. Notice when you're adjusting yourself mid-sentence, when your opinion bends before it's spoken, when your laugh sounds rehearsed. Then ask, who would I be here if I didn't need approval? That question is a compass, because the real you doesn't shout, but it remembers. And it's waiting for you in the quiet. Next, create spaces where mirroring isn't required. Spend time alone, not numbing, but listening. What do you gravitate toward when no one's watching? What music do you actually like? What do you do when no one needs you to do anything? That's where your shape begins to reappear. And most importantly, know this: you are allowed to be different in different rooms. Flexibility isn't the enemy. But when every room erases you, it's time to choose one where your truth is safe. Your identity is not a costume for connection. You don't have to shrink to fit in. You don't have to borrow every trait to be lovable. You are not a reflection of others. You are your own light. Let it flicker. Let it steady. Let it burn. Because who you are without the influence, without the performance, without the mimicry, is not too much. It's just waiting to return.